Dr. Emmanuel, how are you doing? Fabulous to have you on today.
Nice to be on.
Excellent. Okay, so I've decided I will start doing shows that are not in person because it's hard to get people out in person. And you are the first non-in-person guest. And it is great to have you on here. Now, uh, you are coming to us from Indiana, correct?
That is correct.
And I am here in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, that is usually hot, sometimes cold, but always fabulous. And
Yes.
you organized this phenomenal book that I love to plug. And we are going to be not only talking about this book, but talking about liturgy today, the meanings of the various services, why we have them, the development of the services, etc. And people don't realize, this is a tremendous amount of work, this book. We're going to be opening it up. We're going to be showing like different excerpts from it, reading from it. I actually bought a copy of this for a guy who I hope to be the godfather for soon, God willing. And, how many copies have you guys sold so far?
We've sold a few thousand copies. Yeah.
Wow, a few
Yeah. We've sold
thousand.
a few thousand. Yeah.
Okay, there'll be a link to the book on Amazon to this one here in the video description after the stream ends. Get the color version. We're going to go through and see the pictures, and it's really phenomenal. So can you start by telling me what is your background? What was it like? I mean, you grew up Greek Orthodox. What was that like?
No, that's great. So I grew up Greek Orthodox in a kind of a suburb of Detroit. And that was at the time, because you and I are similar in age,
Correct.
older millennials.
We're
Um,
classic millennials.
we're classic millennials. Well said. We grew up in a place that had a whole lot of different ethnic communities, and they were very ethnic. Many
Yes.
of them came after the Second World War. So we had a Greek community, a German community, a Polish community, etc. And all of those parishes were essentially structured the same way. All the German kids would go to German school on Wednesday. The Greek kids would go to Greek school on Saturday. Polish kids went to Polish school and did Polish dancing and all of those other things. But that being said,
If I may
growing up,
interrupt, you
yes,
had mentioned to give the audience idea of how ethnic these parishes were. You had mentioned something about the German community and them
yes.
wanting to be buried. What was it?
Dude, so a lot of the Germans that came to the United States were folks that disagreed with the policies of Germany during the Second World War. But some of them were pretty diehard, and some of them were. I remember it was interesting. I remember there was one boy that I grew up with. I went to school, and he said the Poles were the ones that started the Second World War. It was an interesting kind of situation, So
Okay.
my family obviously fought for Greece, and or the United States. My one grandfather fought in the United States. But I just thought it was so interesting and kind of bizarre that some people would still have that idea. But in any case, it serves that people were very, very ethnic.
Mhm.
And in any case, growing up in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese at that time, you would go to Greek school, you would go to church as much as you could. Language was a priority, but really understanding the services was one of those things that it was like, well, if you really want to be, theological, there's maybe some books in Greek that you can know. But for me personally, there was nothing really available in English, and I always thought it was interesting. Why do we go in the door and out the door and come back in and go back? How does this work? And so
Mhm.
that really inspired me to read very deeply in Orthodoxy. I really read everything that I could get my hands on.
Now, you eventually went to Holy Cross Seminary, correct?
I studied. I did. My undergrad in history. I went to medical school, and then I took courses in theology and philosophy. I actually took courses at Holy Cross, and then I took courses at Boston College. in theology and philosophy
Okay.
after completing my medical education.
Would you like to talk about the time at Holy Cross, or would you prefer to move on to other
You know what?
topics?
It's interesting. I'll say this: the what my time there was really special, predominantly because I met some really extraordinary people. One of whom was one of our authors of the book, Father Lucas Christensen, who is probably the brightest light in liturgical theology in the church in the United States. I mean, in Orthodoxy in the United States. He is just absolutely extraordinary, and he did
He's very
the vast.
intelligent. I've seen interviews with him. Very good.
Yes, yeah, they're excellent, and we're you know, he's exceptionally busy now. He gives these sermon colloquia. He's he's doing parish ministry, and he's also going to be teaching, I think, coming up in the next few months. So hopefully
Wow.
we'll be getting him out to do interviews on the book. You know, I'm just the only one who has some extra time at this point. Everyone else is super busy, especially
Yeah,
catechizing all of the people that are coming in and doing the good work of the priesthood. But I think he's going to be doing some interviews probably later in the next few months. But he's a person that every time I talk to him, you learn something new about liturgy. You know,
I
he
would love to
finished.
have him on if he's so inclined.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and I'll certainly bring that up with him. And he just finished his PhD at Notre Dame,
Oh
and
wow.
his thesis is extraordinary, and it's on the priesthood and liturgy, etc. It's quite an elegant read, and he has a very sublime style of writing.
Mhm.
All of our writers are very gifted, but his knowledge of the liturgical of really the sacred liturgy is probably on par with Taft, with
Wow.
Bob Taft. So
Wow. Now you actually knew Father Robert Taft.
I did. He was actually a friend of mine for 2 years,
Okay.
right before his repose, and we had many dinners. He told me a lot of stories about the Jesuits because he was a Jesuit. But we got along very well. Loved Ritsina, loved Greek food. So we would always have these liturgical conversations over a lot of wine and great dinner, and so it was a lot of fun.
Now, I mean, he was from the old school, so he was like hyper fluent in Latin, ancient Greek, probably French.
He was French, German. He was able to read Syriac, and he was fluent in Arabic,
Wow.
because a lot of
Oh, I
people don't
forgot
know.
about that. Yeah, Arabic as well. Yeah.
He spoke fluent Arabic because the Jesuit he there was a period of time that the Jesuits wanted to kick him out of the
Yeah.
order, and they sent him to the Middle East because they wanted to get him as far away from America as possible. And so he ended up picking up Arabic, and he was loved in the Middle East, and he always loved Arabic culture, and he would always speak very highly of not only the Christians there, but the Muslims were very respectful to him.
Yeah, they tend to have a thing where they like clerics.
Yeah,
There's
they like to say, Abuna, how are you? Abuna, can I have your blessing? So
yeah,
he always,
there's
yeah,
some like magic views that they have about the Muslims
it's
do. Oh
entirely
yeah.
possible. It's entirely possible.
So this book, how did it come to be, and what inspired, this book that we're
Yes,
talking about today?
that's a great question. So it happened around my time in residency. So this was after I finished all of my studies, and I happened, it happened that there was a Russian mission parish that was close to my hospital that would have services when I could go, because in medical residency, you're essentially working,
Correct.
80 to 90 hours a week. But so you can't get to liturgy at 10 in the morning. It's not going to happen. But Father Joshua Genig of St. Innocent in Redford, Michigan, he had services scattered throughout the day. I mean, he was a man who actually converted from Lutheranism, like Father Lucas Christensen. And his life, even though he's a parish priest by himself, his life is coterminous with that of sacred liturgy. And so we ended up meeting, and he finished his PhD in homiletics, and he
Oh wow.
wanted to, yeah, he actually did it, I think, at St. Andrews in Scotland or something like that. But it was that time that he actually, you know, as a Lutheran cleric, he would be a better person to tell his own story, but he was discerning where the church was, and it was, you know, he had an open invitation just because of his background to the Anglican use rite or orthodoxy, and the more that he read, etc., he was convinced of the Orthodox position. So again, a brilliant man, and he wanted to write a catechism for Orthodox Christians. And we were talking, and you know, we got along quite well. And in any case, I said, well, why not a liturgical catechism? Because he was bringing a lot of people into his parish, and
he's featured repeatedly in the book. There's pictures of him. He's featured repeatedly in the book, not just his writings, but actually pictures of him.
Yes,
serving the liturgy as the examples of what's going on. Because in the book, there's actual, like, it'll have, you know, the service, and then it'll show like a picture of a priest doing what it's talking about.
Yes, and so, that's kind of another story. That's another story I want to get into. Right. So we wanted to, essentially, we had a lot of inquirers at that time. And, you know, since that time I've moved on, I moved to Indiana. But essentially we had a lot of inquirers, and they would always ask, so what's actually going on? You know, and so the point was, in the best traditions of the church, because liturgical catechisms were very popular in the 18th and 19th century, even into the 20th century. I have the Phountoules set right here, but they were taken very seriously, our liturgical theology and our symbolic theology during the liturgy. And in any case, we said, well, why don't we have a book so that people can understand what is going on? And after a few nice dinners, we said, well, why don't we start on that? And we have to cover the vast majority of the liturgical year, but also not just to focus on what does this rubric mean in terms of liturgical theology, but getting it all together, because a lot of people that came in, even heritage Orthodox Christians, you ask them to explain the liturgical year or the fasting cycles or why it is, or you know, why we have multiple liturgical hours during the day.
They have no idea. I don't know. They don't care.
Well, do you know what I would say? It's not that they don't care. It's the fact that, and I think this is true for many mainline traditions, you know, or, you know, Christian tradition, people were kind of catechized, and this is true of the boomer generation especially, on kind of like a 3rd and 4th grade level, you know, and unfortunately, that generation of priests, just in general, I think that they were trying to keep the lid on, because the golden generation, which you remember, you know, they were kind of hard to deal with, etc. In any case, now we have a real dedicated generation, I think, of priests that really want to educate liturgically, and we have a lot of people who are interested. And many people have emailed us saying, I wish that I would have learned this stuff in Sunday school back in the day, but I'm glad that I know it now. And we wanted to write on a higher register. So that was the other thing that, you know, when we were talking, it was Father Joshua and I, and then obviously it was too big of a project, and I was the editor, but it was too big of a project for both of us. And we also wanted to make sure that the Greek Orthodox were represented, the Antiochian Orthodox were represented, the Russian Orthodox, that all of the traditions were represented. We didn't want it to get stuck in, this is the book for these types of people.
And so who is the intended audience?
Yeah, so the intended audience is for both heritage Orthodox Christians as well as inquirers. Okay. And the reason for this is that we, you know, it's interesting, because you'd be surprised, and I just know this because I've been to a lot of Greek weddings and I know a lot of priests. Whenever someone gets married, they're like, they have their little book, and it has like, so-and-so's going to get married. And then it always has a brief description of what all of the rites are. And a lot of people want to know that stuff. And so we were like, well, we've got to include marriage. We have to include baptism, because maybe when someone is coming to visit for a family member that's getting baptized or that's getting married into Orthodoxy, that they can know what we do and why we do it. You know?
Okay. And then from there, I mean, I mean, so that explains why you want to write about, baptism, Eucharist, Vespers, but
Yeah.
what are or about baptism and marriage, but what about Vespers? What about Orthros? What about confession? You also
Yes.
wrote about those.
Yes. So one of the things that I would say is that within Orthodoxy and within the Eastern tradition, and really, I would say during the period prior to the schism, when we look at our time in church and liturgical time in particular, it's not just like I go to church on Sunday. We really want to sanctify our entire lives through the liturgical services. Okay.
Mhm.
I am not some paradigm of moral virtue in this, that I'm always going to services, but if I can catch a Vespers, I'll go. And the reason for that is that our lives are coterminous on the worship of God.
Mhm.
And so that's why we have all of these different liturgical hours. It is to sanctify our time and reorient us to the gospel.
Okay. Okay, I like it. And, you know, what so what how does a Eucharist function as a center of gravity for everything else in the book?
Okay. So that's a good question. And I always, and what we try to do within the book is provide as many patristic citations as possible for the reason that what we do things. And it was St. Ignatius of Antioch, who's going to his martyrdom in the 2nd century, who called the Eucharist the medicine of immortality. So it was not like a symbol. It was not a, oh, well, it's good to take communion every once in a while. That someone so early within the history of the church called it the medicine of immortality. And
Mhm.
by the time you get to Nicholas Cabasilas in the 14th century, the whole rite is read as the believer's incorporation into Christ's life, death, and resurrection.
Mhm.
And St. John Chrysostom makes the same points, and hammering the point that it is not a memorial meal among many, it's where heaven and earth actually meet. And so I think that that's really kind of critical. And once you look at that service, the readings, the litanies, and then Vespers and Orthros look as a preparation and echo for that divine service.
Okay, and so that's why you included Vespers and Orthros, because to a lot of people, those seem like things that are extra,
Right.
as opposed to an integral part of the liturgical cycle.
Right. So one of the things, and that's a great question, and one of the things that's worth taking seriously is that criticism. Okay. And
Mm.
and I'll say this as someone who grew up in the Greek Orthodox tradition. We didn't even know what was going on. And it wasn't really kind of talked about. It was like, well, that's the service that happens before, liturgy. But St. Basil actually shows that the daily cycle was actually fixed in the monastic communities of his time.
And he was 4th
And,
century, died in
that's right.
379.
That's right. And and then you have Saint Simeon of Thessalonica, who essentially frames both of those services as kind of an explanation of the divine temple and the services, and they enact salvation history. So they kind of train a person to sanctify their time. And the interesting thing is, and I spoke to a few liturgists about this, that when you really live the liturgy, it's that every kind of daylight, every sunrise or sunset, they pray to this it's that your entire day is sanctified, and those prayers are integrated into your entire life, that your entire life essentially becomes a liturgy, instead of like, this fishbowl I'm practicing, or I'm at work, or I'm doing my job, and this fishbowl on Sundays is liturgy, and that's Thursdays when I go to the bar, whatever. It's all a coherent whole, is what liturgy is that we're trying to get people to really embrace, is that it's a coherent whole.
What exactly is the Divine Liturgy, and why does the church celebrate it? Just like 2-minute version.
Right. So the Divine Liturgy is the central act of Orthodox worship. It's the offering of the Holy Eucharist, which is the body and blood of Christ. the way that we look at liturgy, again echoing Nicholas Cabasilas, is that it's nothing else than the representation of the entire mystery of salvation. So it's the incarnation, it's the economy of salvation, but it's the incarnation, it's the passion, it's the resurrection and the ascension. And it is not just kind of and you see this in certain liturgical authors who I disagree with, not Orthodox ones, but it's not just like a memorial play, but is due to the concept of anamnesis, we actually enact and participate in them. Okay, it's not like the 4th of July celebrations, and so it's a participation, really, for us in the life of the age to come.
And who is the true celebrant of the divine liturgy?
Right. So the true celebrant is actually Christ himself. And you see this in the great entrance where the priest prays, for it is you who offered and are offered and receive and distributed. We would say that the true and proper celebrant is the bishop, and then he designates that to the priest. That's why in the antimens, when we kind of go into this, it's very important to have the blessing of your bishop in order to celebrate divine and sacred liturgy. Yeah. And we offer that, and St. John Chrysostom actually says, if we offer now what was offered then, which is an inexhaustible offering. So the liturgy can never be exhausted because it participates in the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ, which is an inexhaustible treasure.
Yeah, we forget about that, the bishop, the priest acts. Okay, so in the Catholic Church, they say the priest acts in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. Okay. Realistically, the priest acts in persona episcopi, in the person
That's
of
exactly
bishop.
right.
It's
yes,
the bishop who acts in persona Christi. He's the one who he lends his priesthood to the priest, to the deacon. It's the bishop is the real priest who acts in the person of Jesus Christ.
And can I just hop on to that really? That is actually a post-Tridentine, or at least a Tridentine accretion. And I'm going to tell you why. The reason is that even in the Latin Church, priests were typically ordained as a sacerdos simplex, which I don't know if you've ever heard the term, but it was a mass priest. Okay, Luther was ordained as a mass priest initially, for example.
Their job is just to celebrate masses.
Their job is to celebrate mass, and then
or hear confessions or anything else. It's just masses.
That's exactly right. That's why you had the so-called mass guilds in the 12th to 14th centuries.
Can I step in here?
Yeah.
You guys, if you're not paying attention to this is fascinating what we're about to talk about. They basically mass ordained priests in order to do nothing but say masses on a huge cycle.
Right. And that's kind of, I would say it was kind of an abuse. I mean, it was that you would say thousands of masses for the soul of a king or something. And then how many masses would you be able to say for someone who died? And that was kind of a function of...
it was tied into the system of indulgences.
Yeah, medieval indulgences. And then the question was really where were you saying the masses? And because, for example, if you said the mass on a privileged altar, and there's an altar of privilege in Rome, and there's one in Columbus, Ohio, actually, but that would actually be worth more than a regular mass. It would essentially count as a Gregorian Trental, So to the east, that was very foreign, but to the west, it became it was just kind of it just kind of became part of that tradition during the Middle Ages. In any case, the priests were not ordained, for example, to hear confessions. And that's why it was really after the post-Tridentine reforms that you would see the chasuble unfolding in the front as well as the back, because the back symbolized the forgiveness of sins, and the front symbolized the ability to celebrate Mass. Within the East, you had to always have the permission of your bishop, or there was a serious question. And even Phountoules.
1 second, you guys. the chasuble is the garment that the priest wears in the Latin rite on the front, on the back. In the East, it's called the
Phelonian.
phelonion. It's basically the like the poncho looking thing. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
So in any case, yes. So that's we had a little bit of an aside there.
Okay. Now, so during the service, there's a few things that occur, and I want to get to these things um, relatively later, but I want to sort of move into the meaning of liturgical services. So we've talked about the liturgy itself means that it is the story of salvation, right? The
Mhm.
annunciation, the incarnation, the life of Christ, the betrayal of Christ, the crucifixion of Christ, the resurrection of Christ, the ascension of Christ. You know, it's all of that in one. Okay, but we do have other services. You know, we have Orthros, right? What does Orthros represent? Like the 1 2 minute version.
Right. So Orthros is the service of matins,
Mhm.
and it is the morning kind of service, and it also has the typical hymns that you would hear that would apply to the feast of the day.
Mhm.
And so it's one of those very enriching services that if it's commemoration of a martyr, you might hear the story of his martyrdom. You would chant the appropriate verses,
But
and
what does it mean? Is there like a specific? Does it represent like Pentecost? Does it represent the crucifixion of Christ? What does it mean? What is like the
right,
one sentence meaning of Orthros?
right. So Orthros would be the I mean, it's matins, it's the morning service, and we would say that Orthros would be it starts out with the sixth psalm, so it goes penitential, and then it would end at the matins gospel. So you see this darkness into light
Okay,
theme throughout the service.
there you go.
Um,
Yes, yeah. It's that we're starting to lose them here in the chat.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry about that. Yeah.
that's all right. They have really short attention spans. I
But
mean,
that's all right,
really short
and
attention
we're doing the
spans.
best, that we can.
Yeah. So yeah, so Orthros is this darkness into light, right? It's the
Mhm.
coming of Christ into the world is sort of what it represents. And then we have Vespers, right? And I've heard before that Vespers represents creation.
Mhm. That's true, and not only the creation, but also the fall, and then that's why you hear, and then, but with always a tinge or a hope of future mercy, which is why at the end you hear the Fosularon. And so and again it starts at the darkness, but there's always a hope that it ends with.
Right. And
Uh,
I've heard also that Compline, I've read that Compline also represents the fall.
That's true. That is true. And
So
Compline
that
is one of those services. We actually did not include Compline because it was just getting, the book itself was getting a little bit not unwieldy, but we didn't want it to become unwieldy like a you know, a we didn't want it to become unwieldy. We wanted it to be able to fit in a pew.
well that and that's it. The thing is like you'd ask me what should I add to the book? The answer is nothing. It's
Mhm.
excellent as it
Yeah.
is. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. So then we also have other hours, right? So we have the first hour, we have the third hour, we have the sixth hour, we have the ninth hour. And people go,
Mhm.
well, where do those fit in? Right. So first hour is 6 a.m.,
Mhm.
third hour is 9 a.m., sixth hour is noon, ninth hour is 3 p.m. What does the first hour represent?
Yeah, so you know what? I have to be honest. My background is mostly in the liturgy itself. As far as
Okay.
the different liturgical hours, I would probably defer those questions to Father Lucas or Father Joshua.
Well, I'll have him on. I'll grill him.
Yes, yes, yeah, and
Father
I would do
Lucas.
that. I would do that because again, it's one of those things that as an editor, you have a certain kind of quorum of knowledge about
Well,
the
highly
liturgy, but
specialized.
yeah, but at the same time, they would be better at those types of questions.
Okay. Okay. That's okay. Um, what about okay, so going back to the liturgy itself. So let's focus on the liturgy.
Yeah,
What is the small entrance? And what
right.
because people hear the entrance, they hear, oh, the great entrance, oh, the small entrance, and they don't quite know the difference between them, or what is the small entrance, and then what is the great entrance? Just
Yeah.
real quickly.
So the small entrance, or in the Greek, it's mikri esodos. That takes place during the liturgy of the word after the opening liturgies as well as the antiphons. And at this time, the priest or the deacon carries the gospel, and he processes from outside the altar through the north door of the iconostas, and then back through the royal doors to the altar. And the choir sings at that time the "Come, Let Us Worship." And the interpretation is actually really interesting because the interpretation comes from us very, very early. St. Germanus of Constantinople talks about it, and he says it's the appearance of the Son of God into the world.
Just a second.
Yes. Yes, it's a necessary, that's great that you picked that book up.
Great book to read. Very short commentary.
Yes, and the procession of the deacon and priest holding the gospel book is the image of the incarnation, essentially God the Word entering among his people. So that's going to be, that's kind of the central theme. Then you get other interpretations, but it just kind of follows his interpretation. So Maximus the Confessor also talks about the appearance of the Son of God. And Nicholas Cabasilas says the coming of Christ to preach to his people. So that's really in terms of kind of liturgical meaning, that's kind of where we go there. As far as the gospel book, why is it carried in procession, is that the gospel book represents Christ, who is the Word of God. In the beginning was the Word. Okay. And so that's why we have like Sophia Orthi, or wisdom let us attend. Yeah, calls the people to stand upright and be fully alert, because again, it is the wisdom of God being kind of manifest. And so that's really important. As far as there's a prayer, and at the small entrance, it's Master, the Lord our God, who appointed the heavenly orders and hosts, etc. There's a real strong tradition within Orthodoxy, and I would say within the Universal Church, especially the first 1,000 years, that the angel and the heavenly powers actually serve with us, and that's why there's a strong connection between divine liturgy and, for example, liturgy from the Book of Revelation. And so that is mentioned in the Book of Revelation. As far as the great entrance that you asked about,
1 second. You guys can see on screen there's an image of the small entrance, and the priest is holding a gospel book. So this is the one given towards the beginning of the service. And, okay. All right, sorry, continue, Dr. Emmanuel.
Yeah, so I was going to say that the great entrance takes place at the beginning of the Liturgy of the Faithful, after the dismissal of the catechumens. And this is when the priest and the deacon carry the prepared but not yet consecrated gifts. And there's actually a fascinating book on this by Gabriel of Severus, who describes this in detail. We're actually going to be working on the translation of Gabriel of Severus, because he's a well-known liturgist who hasn't been translated in English. But in any case, he says that even though the gifts have been prepared, they're still venerable because they have been blessed and honored and given to God. And in any case, during this great entrance, the great entrance, according to Germanus, says that the entrance with the holy gifts prefigures the second and glorious coming of Christ, when he will come with the armies of the angels. And this is why you see just this glorious procession. And so it is the King of Glory at his second coming. Interestingly enough, and we do mention this also in the book, because there's pious kind of practices that when the priest is carrying the gifts, and this is especially true among people of the Middle East, sometimes people will grab the hem of his garment.
Correct.
And there's a clear gospel connection there. And they kind of pray for healing.
Well, yeah, the connection being the woman who was afflicted with the flow of blood.
Yeah, that's exactly, of course, that's the
She
gospel
touches the
connection.
hem of his garment, and all of a sudden Christ says, "Power went out of me who touched me."
That's right. That's exactly right. That's correct.
The thing is, the reason I throw these things in randomly is because, so many of the people who are coming to church now, they've grown up in environments where they're completely unchurched. And thank God they're coming back. Thank God. Right. But we have to, help them along and remind them of these things because they didn't grow up with them. And so it's our job to help reinforce these things for them and bring them up
You're,
to speed.
you're exactly right. And the interesting thing is that the divine service, what we tried to do in the book, and I spent a long time, and we had a number of people involved in the project. I mean, and it was kind of the task of the editor to say, we need more commentary on this. Why does this happen? We wanted to treat the book as you are holding the hand of a senior liturgist, a priest liturgist, who's walking you through all of the services and telling you exactly what the scriptural
Correct.
citations are and the patristic citations for it. And so that's what we really tried to do.
Correct. Absolutely correct. I'm trying to find an image of the great entrance to show people, but I'm having a hard time finding
I
one that will
think it's
actually.
in, I think it's in, I think it is in the book. Let me see.
Okay. We'll go into the book then
It's right
shortly.
here. It's right here in the book.
Okay.
It's
What
page 334.
334. So let's go to excellent idea, by the way. It's
Yeah,
so
it's 334, and it has the commentary right there. I will say this, as far as the yeah, I think that was a beautiful picture. So we actually did all of these pictures in a simulated liturgy. So because we have a strong respect for the sacredness of.
here's an image right here you guys can see of the actual service.
Right.
Or of the great entrance. See the priest, you can see right here, he has a chalice, he has a paten with the bread because it's not been consecrated yet. Okay. And then there's this great commentary on it, right?
Mhm.
So you can see this is what the book is filled with right after. So you have this picture here, it shows exactly what's being said.
Mhm.
So it has the choir, the prayers of the priest, right? So it follows along the service book. Then it describes the clergy make the sign of the cross, kiss the altar table. The priest asks forgiveness of the faithful in a low voice. Both priest and deacon proceed to the prothesis table, takes a large veil over the holy gifts which have been offered yet not consecrated, places on his shoulders. So it shows a picture of it. Then there's a commentary on it so that you guys can understand what is going on. The commentary goes, the great entrance once again leads us yet deeper into the mystery of the divine liturgy, just as a small entrance preserved a practical movement in the form of a ritual procession of the Gospels, so too does the entrance with the gifts. In ancient divine liturgy, the people who brought gifts of bread and wine would deposit them with the deacons in a designated place. In Constantinople, this was a separate building. At Hagia Sophia,
Yeah.
the great cathedral church, this building was near the northeast corner of the basilica. Then it goes through, it gives you even more. It's not just a little bit, it's a lot of this. And then with a note where you can find out even more. Okay.
Mhm.
Then it continues on with the service. And we're going to go through this book and show you guys more and more of this because this is a what's it called, a resource I really think you guys should have. I think every catechumen should read this. It really is phenomenal because it shows you exactly what's going on in the service, what the theological significance is of it. You will learn theology from the liturgy.
Mhm. Right, and just to piggyback on with that, Ubi, I just wanted to say that what we wanted to do was put the commentary of the saints. So you see all these saints on the wall, or you hear of them from time to time. And we wanted the people to know what they actually said about the sacred liturgy so that they become really a three-dimensional person to the extent that they could.
There you go.
And not only that, but when we put the lives of the saints there, it was always kind of leading back to sacred liturgy.
There you go. There you go. And hold on a second. I'm going to move to my next question here. So, what is the cherubic hymn? And why is it
Yeah,
sung during the Great Entrance?
that's great. So the Cherubic Hymn, or the Cherubicon, was introduced into the liturgy in the 6th century and by Emperor Justinian. And it goes something like, we who mystically represent the cherubim and sing the thrice holy hymn to the life-giving Trinity, let us now lay aside all earthly cares, that we may receive the King of all, invisibly escorted by the angelic hosts. And so what you see here is really the convergence of heaven and earth. And the hymn itself expresses the absolute convergence of heaven and earth, as this is what true divine liturgy is. This is really important because for Orthodox Christians, the liturgy is not something that we make up. It is not something that is invented, or it's, this is something that we receive really as a heavenly gift. And in any case, the hymn of the cherubim in Isaiah 6 and Ezekiel, mystically joining that angelic liturgy, is really important. So there was definite scriptural kind of bases for that hymn.
Okay. And then, I mean, so, Tchaikovsky has a great rendition of the Cherubic Hymn.
Yes,
Very
beautiful.
excellent one. And why are the gifts not yet consecrated at the great entrance? So the priest processes out with the deacon, the other clergy. They're holding the unconsecrated bread, the unconsecrated wine. They have the altar service with them carrying fans. They're reading prayers. They process through the church. They come to the doors. Why are the gifts not yet consecrated? Is Christ already present?
Right. No. There were a number of debates in Byzantine theology. Essentially, what you would get is, and this is true in the Old Testament as well, is that you would get the offering of the gift to God, and then you would have the sacrifice done. So there was always an offering, and then there was the sacrifice, and you see this typology in divine liturgy. So we have an offering of the gifts, and you have the sacrifice. And the sacrifice would occur obviously during the consecration. But that being said, those gifts, because they are offered, and Nicholas Cabasilas and Theodore of Mopsuestia, Theodore had some obviously different ideas, but he was highly regarded as a liturgist. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not
a
going to
nice way to
jump
put
into
it.
that one. I'm not going to jump, because you have far more prodigious knowledge of Theodore of Mopsuestia than I do.
He's a
But
fascinating guy.
no, he's kind of like an origin character for
He is
the.
very much so. Yeah.
So but he for his time, I mean, he was an extraordinary liturgist. But Nicholas Cabasilas kind of echoes him, but he obviously is speaking, from a firmly Orthodox perspective, that just because, due to the fact that they were offered and they are destined to become the body and blood of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
that intention and liturgical action separates those gifts to be given to God. The act of bearing them forward is a very sacred kind of moment and action, and that's why we bow deeply.
I gotcha. Okay. And then, with hold on a second. What do the commemorations made by the priest and the deacon during the entrance actually mean?
Right. So this is really important. So every liturgy is really on behalf of the entire church, living and dead. The faithful, the departed, and other specific persons in particular, for their health or well-being or their salvation. And this is echoed in the liturgy, and when we hear that the Eucharist is offered on behalf of all and for all. So we try not, in terms of themed masses or themed liturgies, the Orthodox Church doesn't really do that, because we are celebrating for the entire church. And that's really what I would say. As far as those who have fallen asleep, we made an effort really to talk about prayer for the dead, because it was not only the early tradition of the church, But what's interesting now is we have an abundance of medical research on near-death experiences, and I find this absolutely fascinating. And I've actually taken care of patients who had near-death experiences, and they're like, I was in hell, but I saw my pious grandmother, and she said, "Come to Jesus," and she pulled me out of there. These are real, like, deep theological experiences that
Yeah.
I've heard as a physician. And so I think that we can point to the tradition, but there's also an abundance of, like, really interesting near-death experiences that I think also point to the validity of the tradition.
Oh, I just did a job for a man last week who had a near-death experience. He was dead for 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And he said he passed he had a heart attack, passed out, and he
Yeah.
found himself he described it as being on, uh, in the bottom of a Navy ship. It
Yes.
was dark, and there were, like, red lights to help your night vision,
Yes.
and that he said there were demons. He said what he now understands to be demons, but he said these terrifying creatures, they were pulling blood through his skin, out of his
That
chest, and he was strapped down. He said that he felt like, and by the way, because I know you guys are go in and out on attention, this is not me. This is someone else's experience. So don't be
yeah.
like, "Whoa, Ubi, I can't believe you had that experience." No, it's not me. It's someone else. He said that he felt strapped down and he felt that it was one, eternal, two, that he deserved to be there. It was where he actually belonged. And it was the most intense hopelessness he could ever possibly imagine. And then just multiplied numerous times. And he said that in it, all of a sudden, he screamed, "Jesus, help me." He was not a religious man at all, never been religious. And he said, all of a sudden, there was this bright flash of light and he couldn't see a figure, but he felt someone holding him from behind. And he said, I was overcome by happiness, joy, and relief. And I heard a voice say, I'm sending you back. It's not your time yet. And all of a sudden he woke up and he was in the ICU. And it turned out he was all strapped in. He'd been dead for 6 minutes. So get this. This is really interesting. He was the first guy who had a certain heart pump put in the state of Nevada. Okay. So they put this pump in, he wakes up. It's been a while since he died, came back. He said that the nurse is leaving, goes, yeah, new nurse will be coming in. It's in ICU. So think of how busy ICUs are. Like insanely busy, right? Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
without a question, it's so interesting because I have so many of these stories, but I want to hear your end before I jump in. So he heard the
So he's sitting there, and this guy comes to him. This nurse comes in. He has a badge, dress, everything. He comes in. He goes, "Hi, my name is Michael. I'm your nurse tonight." And the nurse just sits there and talks with the guy like all night in an ICU. Weird,
yeah.
right?
Yes.
And the guy says to him, this nurse Michael goes, you have to get right with God. You need to get a Bible. You need to start reading the book of Matthew. Have you ever read the Bible? He goes, no, I've never read it ever. I'm not religious in any way, shape, or form. She says, you need to get right with God. And then just talk to him about different things. He said, this guy approached me with curiosity, like, oh, what happened? Oh, this, very like prompting and he didn't come and go, I know what happened, right? He's just very like, oh, this happened. Oh, that happened. Oh my, And he said, this guy said that my wife came and she met this guy, Michael, and talked with him and this and that. And then Michael goes, well, my shift is over. I have to leave. I'll see you. It's a pleasure. About an hour or two later, the chaplain for where this guy works came in and said, I had a premonition that said, I need to get you a Bible. You need to start reading the book of Matthew. So, okay. Oh, so about a month later, the hospital wants to have this party because they want to celebrate, they want to bring this crew together who have put in this new like heart pump valve
It's a
thing.
left ventricular assist device. Yes,
Okay,
I
that
know
must have been
exactly what
that.
you're talking. Yeah.
So it was the first one ever put in Nevada, and they
Yeah.
wanted to have like a gather, like a dinner, and invite these people and have a presentation on it, and invite other doctors. So this guy goes, "Well, I want to invite Michael because he was really great. He spent a lot of time with me."
Mhm.
So they try and hunt this guy down. There's no record of this guy existing.
Yeah.
He doesn't work at the hospital. There was no one there named Michael. We have no record of it, or there was nothing.
Yes.
Yeah. So there you go.
It's interesting. It's interesting. If I could just piggyback on that, We
Sure.
had a lot of, and we put a lot of the book for for the prayers for the dead, exactly for that reason. It's interesting. As a physician, I have seen a lot of near-death experiences. Interestingly enough, I think that among adults, it's like 70 to 75% positive, depending on the study, and 20 to 25% negative near-death experiences. But those near-death experiences, and again, I've met some of these patients. I was at a major trauma center. These, what you described as being an absolutely hellish or terrifying near-death experience is not out of the ordinary. When they say negative, they also put in parentheses hellish, because these people really experience and in vivid detail. I mean, I'll never forget it. I was taking care of a young boy, but he was a drug dealer, really bad. It was shot a few times, etc. And I'll never forget. He woke up and he said, that just kind of goes back to it, but he saw himself in hell. He had a vision of the devil essentially counting the money that he made from drugs, and it
Oh,
was his grandmother who saved him. That he was counting gold coins, and then his grandmother said, "You have to come back." But his grandmother was like a pious woman. It makes me very emotional when I tell this story. Or children who were raised in effectively atheist households that would have some injury, like they would drown in a swimming pool, and then they could describe what the anesthesiologist was wearing when they weren't conscious. That they
right.
said, I was floating and I saw little angels. So it's interesting that I think that some of the strongest apologetics for like orthodoxy is the modern near-death experiences that are oftentimes, when you look at some of the patristic literature, you're like, this is way out there. It's like, no, it's actually entirely consistent with what we're seeing.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
it's an interesting thing. And so we definitely hammered that home in the prayers for the dead, but also when someone's dying, I think we put that in the book as well. We don't want people, there's, especially within Greek culture, but in many cultures, it's like if you have to call the priest when someone's like dying or very sick, it's like, up, it's time to die. It's like, no, we should be contacting the priest when someone's sick, when someone goes in the hospital, not 20 minutes after they die, you know. So
Yeah, there you go. There you go. We have Burning Bushes wrote here. I came to Orthodoxy after an experience of hell. The Mother of God rescued me and told me to worship her Son and to go to church.
can I tell you something? This is very important. Thank you for that comment. It's so interesting that we started out with this stuff and now we've gone here. There is a part of the book of Saint Cyprian and Justina
Mhm.
that has Saint Cyprian and Justina in there, and they are the patrons of people who were formerly engaged in the occult or dark practices, and they're the patron of those people. And what's interesting is that the reason why we chose those saints, we chose every saint for a very particular reason, was because there are not a few people who come to the church after experiencing a hellish type of experience because they were going down the real wrong road. And so that's why we chose those saints, and we talked about those practices in the book too.
Yeah, and I mean, the fastest growing religion right now in America is Wicca.
Right, right. And it's interesting. I think that it appeals on some level to some people, but at its core, it's evil. I think that there's kind of a thin veneer of white magic, but I think at its core, it's not good at all.
Well, the thing is that Wicca, the joke is that Wiccan stands for white, insecure, chubby chicks around nature. Um,
I don't. I've never heard that one. It is interesting. It is interesting. But you know what? I'll say this. I think this is why Orthodox there's an element of mystery and liturgy, okay, within Wicca. Okay, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I'm saying that that means that they're searching for something. They're searching for the symbolism and liturgy. And ideally, they'll find that in the church, but if not, they go to very weird lengths, I think, and very dark places in order to find that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble, so I won't continue on with my
Yeah, no,
opinions of
yeah. We'll just
Wicca.
we can move
The
on.
people get into it. Just
Yeah, it can be very, very catastrophic for them.
yeah, none of its practitioners are good looking enough to be on this show. So anyway, let's get back to the liturgy here. So question, why do here we got someone here saying, I was an occultist magician and a raging alcoholic for a decade. I venerated the inexhaustible cup icon of desperation. It's been 4 years since then. Oh wow, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. All right, so sorry, I apologize. I don't know if that's a joke or not. This guy, I'll put it up
No, I
anyway.
think no, the alcoholics, there's actually there's a strong devotion among the Russian Orthodox because a lot of Russians struggled with alcoholism.
Oh,
And
really?
and it's just I think in any case, there is that particular devotion in Russia to the inexhaustible cup.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to this question. So during the liturgy, especially in the Russian tradition, not so much I've noticed not so much a Greek tradition, but during the Russian tradition, it's about the doors open and close, the royal doors in the iconostasis, the
Yes.
main doors at the front. So those open and close at different times. Why is that?
So the opening and closing of the royal doors is really interesting. And as far as particular practice, and I have the book here by Ioannis Phountoules, there is a variety of practices, including when you open and close the doors. Okay. And we've got Katie chasing cathedral. We'll talk about liturgical colors. I just saw that thing that pop in.
There's a whole section in the book on the liturgical colors.
Yes.
It's very, yeah, I mean, I can't say enough. Like, this is like a phenomenal. So
Yeah.
I've been told I say phenomenal too much. So I'm going to turn it to fabulous. Okay.
Or extraordinary. You could use
Extraordinary, phenomenal, fabulous, excessively great.
But
There's a
we'll
whole
read
section
those.
of the book.
We'll read those on the. Let me just land the plane with the royal doors.
Land
So
that
the
plane.
opening and closing of the doors shows essentially at a deep level mystery of divine revelation and concealment. That in certain times in life, it's like God is very clear, and then God like closes the doors, kind of close. It can be very hard to see God. That's the image that I always get. But essentially when they close, it's kind of like the divine mystery being guarded. Okay.
Mhm.
It's kind of in the iconostas itself is that wall or the threshold of the boundary that between the kind of the visible and invisible world. And we make it a point within the book to kind of discuss those things. The doors opening for the small entrance, like the coming of Christ into the world, the great entrance, the offering of the sacrifice, the anaphora, Holy Communion. They close to signify the sacredness of what is transpiring beyond kind of the human. And so those types of things, especially for the priest communion, again, Greek Orthodox parishes can vary in terms of how often that they use them. But even Greek monastic practice, and again, I was involved in the Phountoules book, the questions and answers in a peripheral way. But he says, really, it depends on your bishop and how he prefers the liturgy, just because there was just such a varying tradition. Some it was like after the great entrance, everything was closed until communion.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was a significant closure of the doors, and he doesn't really weigh in, and he's probably the greatest liturgist that has ever lived.
Wow.
So,
I've been warned not to change phenomenal to fabulous.
okay,
Okay.
we will
All
go with
right.
fabulous,
All
and
right.
let's
We're
get
going with
into.
fabulous. Fabulous.
I'm
Lost my
gonna read just for the girl. I'm going to find it here.
Well,
Oh
I have
wait,
I have that bookmarked. So we'll
Okay.
get into it later. Okay.
Okay.
So, and how do the small and great entrances tell the story of salvation?
So, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but if we're going to break it down, the small entrance is the incarnation. So God, the Word, comes to proclaim the kingdom, and the great entrance is the passion, the death, the glorification. He goes forth to sacrifice. The King of Glory enters the kingdom, the last judgment, and the anaphora and the communion. After that, it's kind of like the resurrection and the Pentecost. That's why we receive communion standing instead of kneeling or in any other position.
By the way,
And
the Armenians will oftentimes receive it kneeling.
the Armenians are interesting because they picked up a lot of Latin
They did.
customs and traditions. Um, I think even liturgical vesture, um, because of their closeness to Rome for a very long time. It's interesting because the Armenian rite is to me it's fascinating, but I think that they have lost. Like I don't think that they celebrate the anointing of the sick.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they just have confession, communion. It's acknowledged as a rite, but it's not like celebrated. It's interesting, just kind of how their liturgical rites.
If you're Armenian, please chime in the comments on this.
Yes,
I'm
please,
curious to know
please,
more.
and I can actually show you a screenshot. I'll try and
The
find a
other
screenshot, but
the other thing is if you've had a near-death experience, I'm now interested now we've been talking about this. I wanna know, write in the comments what that was like and how it changed you or if it did. I'm really curious. I really wanna know.
Mhm.
And also to, Frosh2466, you became a channel member. Thanks, buddy. I really appreciate it. I'm always happy when I see people become channel members. You're helping the cause. And there was another person here I'm trying to find who also became a channel member. I'm having a hard time finding it there. Where was it? I think it was, oh, it's from before. It was Bobby something. I forget. Okay. All right. Sorry. Continue on, doctor.
No, that's I think I pretty much touched it. It's kind of again all the things in the liturgy are just kind of a recapitulation of the entire work of salvation.
Okay. Now, confession is a service in your book that's explicitly about failure.
Yes.
How do the church fathers frame this so it is not simply like just guilt management, but actually something healing?
So this is actually the section. This was written by Father Joshua Genig, and I think he did a really good job. One of the things that I would say is that I always I always appreciated Saint Mark the ascetic,
Mhm.
and he wrote about confession is essentially when we say that sin separates us from God, he actually says no, it's not. It's separation of us, but that's from our side. It's not God separating us as and we separate ourselves from God, and so that the sacrament of confession or the holy mystery of confession and absolution is the restoration of that relationship. And I think that what's important is that is that it is to be used as a tool for us to advance in the spiritual life. And this is what Father Joshua mentioned in the book, which I think was very powerful. And Father Patrick O'Grady did this in the spiritual life part of the book, which is, the purpose of life as an Orthodox Christian is not to just avoid sin. Okay. It's like, I don't even know. It's like the purpose of driving is not to, you know, get into accidents. Okay. It's to get where you're going. Okay. And so what I would say is that it was framed as as something that we are supposed to partake of that will help us become better Christians when we examine ourselves, when we confess our sins, and this is from the Epistle of St. James, obviously, and we amend our life. That's really important. There is a varied practice within Orthodoxy. Within the Russian tradition, it's more common to go around once a month. Within the Greek tradition, it was more common, and we put we put this in there to go between around 4 times a year, was what the Ecumenical Patriarchate recommended, as an addendum to the Mogila's Confession or something like that. So, it can vary, but you don't want to not go. And unfortunately, within the Church of America, it kind of became the forgotten sacrament, if you will, because a lot of people, especially from Greece, their spiritual father was back in Greece, and when they would go back, they would make a confession. So there were real relationships there that within the boomer generation, they're like, oh, my parents go to Greece to go to confession. It was just kind of looked over here in the US for a long time. But I
Well,
think it's
that's
returning.
in our conversations. You had mentioned that was one of the reasons why these Greeks paid to have monastics come here,
Well, I would
because
say this,
so
that
many of the clergy are just so many of the clergy just weren't very good at here. I mean, not every priest. I mean, we expect our priests to be really good at everything, and that's not
yes,
realistic. They're humans. Some priests are really good at hearing confessions, others are not. Some priests have wonderful singing voices, others don't. Some
yeah,
priests are excellent financial managers, others aren't. Some priests have encyclopedic knowledge of liturgics or maybe catechesis or whatever, and
yeah,
others don't. Well, I mean, not every priest is given permission to hear confessions, and it's a good reason why. Is that one, they're not all good at it. Two, hearing confessions wears them out. And I think it humbles them in a lot of ways when they see how broken people are. But
yes,
it's also that I mean, I mean, for me, like, I'll say this, people write into me and they tell me the trauma they've been through. And I don't mean to like tell these people, like, don't do that. How dare you?
yeah,
Yeah, I'm not trying to shame them, but I'll say this, I could not hear confessions. I mean, that would destroy me inside. When people write in and they tell you, like, these are the problems I'm having in my life, what advice do you give? My advice is go to your priest. I mean, you have questions about dead languages or history, ask me. I'm that guy. But
yeah,
like, I mean, they brought over monastics because the monastics they're very introspective. They tend to be develop the skill for hearing confessions. That doesn't mean that you should go to a monastery for confession. I'm not saying that. You should go to confession with your parish priest. That's who you
mhm,
should go to first and foremost. But find a priest you can open up to who you feel very comfortable with. If you feel like you can't open up to that priest, and then find another in your area. But
yeah.
people who are like, oh, I have to go to a monastery for confession, it's like, no, you don't. But back in the day, it was a different situation.
It was a different situation, and I would say this. I think that when we mentioned confession in the book, finding a priest who's a good and sincere spiritual father is very important.
Mhm.
And I look at the priesthood really as kind of, in a certain sense, like the medical profession. Okay, I'm a generalist in terms of practitioner, so I have to know generally how the diagnosis of illness and the general management. But there are some people who are specialists, and a cardiologist cannot be a neurologist. And
Right.
finding someone who is sincere and really lives the spiritual life to the extent that they can, and very dedicated. You can generally tell. And I don't think that you have to be shopping around, but it's one of those things that we do want to introduce, within the book and within a broader parish, is a bigger appreciation for the sacrament, just because it's a way that people reconcile themselves to God, but they also get an enormous amount of grace. A lot of people, after they make a good confession, have reported even to me that I feel a burden being lifted, and I get that supernatural grace from the mystery to live a better life, or for strength to put up with the things that they put up with. It's something that unfortunately has been too neglected. So
It's also that people get nervous. They go, well, I'm too embarrassed to say it. You hear stories of priests falling asleep during confessions because they just hear the same stuff again and again.
well, it's one of those things that I think that I I've never experienced that. But what we wanted to do was provide a general outline in terms of, and again, this was, the priests were actively involved with this, as this is how you prepare for confession. This is how you confess. It's not meant to be a therapy session. It is meant to be an opportunity to get you right with God. And
Right.
sometimes a lot of folks maybe might not know what's required, and so this kind of gives them a little bit of a guide for them to make their first confession. What's interesting is we got a few emails from folks that, and they were actually Greek Orthodox, that are like, yeah, I actually went because I didn't know what I was supposed to do, and they were all like 50s or 60s, in that age range. And they're like, yeah, now I know what I do, and it wasn't that bad.
Yeah,
So
I mean, yeah, it's the priests, whatever you're gonna say, they go, well, the priest is gonna lose respect for me. And it's just like most of these priests have heard so much dirt from so many people that they don't even remember it. They're
right,
just,
it's one of those things that being in medical practice, and seeing a lot of patients every day, and you being in your field, it's like, can you actually remember what you did, what you saw 3 weeks ago? I mean, like, I don't know. I
I
just kind
actually
of
have a
deal
very
with.
good memory, so
You
yes.
probably do. Maybe
People
I
call
was.
me up from years later and I remember what I had done. I mean, I don't remember their faces, but when I hear their voices, I go, oh yeah, yeah.
That's
By the
good.
way, for Chetnik, 313, $10. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate the super chat. You're making it happen there.
As an aside, for this man, I could tell that he's a Serb, and I know this because I actually went to a Serbian parish when I was younger because it was the only one in town. And what's interesting is that we actually have the life of Saint Sava in the book,
Mhm.
because the Serbs have to have the life of Saint Sava. They have to have representation, or else they
You know,
won't
I
buy
have to say, like, I'm not really big on Slavs in general. Like, they're not my kind of people. But every Serb I've met has just been this lovely person. Well, actually, well, there's one of them I didn't like, but all the rest of them are these lovely people, very friendly. They're sort of like Greek Slavs,
it. Well,
you know?
if you look at their genetic composition, they probably are.
Yeah, they're just
But
kind of laid back, friendly. They just like to chat, smoke a lot. I remember this one guy, he was a roofer doing a roof on my parents' house. And he was smoking. I go, how much you smoke? He goes, I smoke too much. I'm like, how long have you been smoking? He's like, 15 years. I'm like, how old are you? He's like, 26. Like,
well,
um,
yeah, I've had wonderful experiences with a very nice community. I agree.
here you go. Smart man. You got a compliment.
I appreciate that.
And he
We
says,
actually have in there "Samo sloga Serbina spasava," because their little flag has those C's on it, and that's what it sounds for, or that's what
okay.
it means, is only unity will save the Serbs, and that comes from their Orthodox faith. So that's in the book.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I have to say, like, I've met a lot of people from the Balkans, and Serbs were phenomenal people.
yeah.
I'm not even gonna comment on Albanians. I don't need to go on a tirade.
I've known
Um,
some wonderful Albanians. I
I
mean,
don't want
just
to hear. I don't want to. I'm just kidding.
yeah,
I've known a few, but they were all from the very south. Anyway, the it's communism does some horrible things to people, and atheism does even more. All right, so pulling all five services together, what is the case you're making for why this matters to someone living right now?
right. So I would probably take from Maximus the Confessor is that the divine services, okay, taken in their totality, essentially it's a working model of the entire cosmos and man's relationship to God. And every
Mhm,
gesture in the service, every entrance or exit corresponds to something about a heavenly reality.
mhm,
That's what we're about. And I think that's the strongest possible answer to a secular or semi-secular person. Now, and I'll say it this, it's because the way that we act in liturgy, and you could even make this analogy and make it to like, do I really have to do things for my wife, for my kids, or does any of it matter? And it's like, yeah, every little thing that you do changes your life or your wife's perception of you, or your children's perception of you. So all of those little things matter in life, and so they matter to us in sacred liturgy. And
Correct.
especially, I think that liturgy is important because we have this human atomization, and we have this like constant distraction. Like I'm a phone person. I mean, I'm on call and I get calls from patients, etc. Got this constant attention issue. And actually pulling back for that hour and a half during sacred liturgy is so important to us. And that liturgical time to say, even when I am working and doing those types of things, I am still praising God. That the liturgy does not stop after the end of the dismissal and the announcements after liturgy,
Correct.
but it actually continues. That was the hard part of being the editor of when does the liturgy actually stop? Because you can have the polychronia afterwards, it can go into a different liturgical hour, etc. Where does it actually stop? And so, and in fact, it doesn't stop, and it just kind of continues. So our lives are sacred liturgy, and
There you
how
go.
we behave is either good liturgy or bad.
There you go. Okay, I want to move into talking about the book for a bit before we go to more questions, if that works for you, Doctor.
Sure.
Okay. So let's see. We got here we go. Okay. So this is the part you guys have all been waiting for. This is a part that all of you have dreamt of. We're finally going to give it to you. So this is the book, The Divine Services of the Orthodox Church with Commentary. Okay. Now, if you go through it here, it's broken. There's some really great stuff here. So for example, he goes through the actual, you can see here there's this
Liturgical wheel.
yeah, liturgical wheel. It explains exactly where everything is, where it all works out. So you have here, like for example, where would you say? Let's start with Theophany, January 6th. Okay. And then it goes through the Triodium begins and the Great Fast and Holy Week. Then we have Pascha, Pentecostarion. We have Ascension, Pentecost, and we have a normal time. Then we have Apostles' Fast, St. Peter and Paul's feast day coming up in 9 days. Then we have normal time. Then we begin the Dormition Fast, the Transfiguration on August 6th. We have the Dormition. Then we have normal time. We go into Nativity of the Theotokos, Exaltation of the Cross. We continue on, beginning of the Nativity Fast, entrance of the Mother of God into the temple, the Nativity of Christ. We're back at Theophany. It shows roughly what it is we're doing here.
Yeah.
And you can see this great, like, it goes through like daily cycle, breaks down all of the hours for you, cycle of the week in the 8-week period. That's what's known as the octoechos and the tone. There's a movable lunar and a movable solar. It goes through, explains all that. Okay. It breaks down the different types of services we have. Great stuff. Okay. Then you can get to, it breaks down the 12 great feasts for you
I was going to
guys.
say it has the liturgical colors. If you go above that, for the one lady that was really nice and
Okay.
asked about the colors,
Yes.
it
Thank
has
you.
it. There's the
Yeah.
liturgical
It
colors.
explains it here on page 61. Okay. It explains what each of those colors are. Yeah, you can get that. Okay, but then it has the 12 feasts of the church. So you have birth of the Virgin Mary. Then we have whoops.
And
Exaltation of the
this
cross.
is really important, and I'm so glad you brought this up. What we did was, because some priests preach on the 12 feasts and others kind of we really went very deep into the liturgical and historical sources for like the entrance of Virgin Mary into the temple. We talk about the proto-gospel or the proto-evangelium of James, which was taken very seriously in the early church. And so we made sure to include relevant commentary,
Correct.
so that people can understand who haven't read the Proto-Evangel of James or any of those other things, so that they can kind of understand what's going on. And we took selections from the liturgy, selections from the patristic tradition, and incorporated those in.
So here you can see, so let's just look at this, the entrance of the Virgin Mary into the temple, November 21st. All right, so it gives it tells you what it is here, you can see, okay? Then we have we have the Troparion and the Kontakion, which are just hymns, is what those are. I could not for the life of me tell you the difference between Troparion and Kontakion. They're just hymns for our purposes. Then you have this beautiful icon here, okay? And then it moves on to the next one, and it has all 12 feasts. Really great, okay? Then if you go up to, let's see,
It has the
190.
baptismal rite. Yeah.
Yeah, the holy mysteries of initiation, baptism, chrismation, Holy Communion.
Can I just pop in and
Sure,
just tell
sure.
you why we did that? We did this because so many people are interested in the church, and
Mhm.
we wanted to give them a book such that if they memorize the contents of the book, we had to, instead of saying, oh, well, you got to buy this, you got to buy a water and the spirit, you have to buy this, you have to buy that, essentially buying $1,000 worth of books. Okay.
Correct.
We wanted to compress as much as we could into $52.95 for color and $34.95 for this.
By the way, the color one is the one you want. You do not want the black and white. The
Yeah.
illustrations are fabulous.
Yeah, it took a long time because we really wanted to get high quality, illustrations. And this goes into, there was one comment about Amazon, and the reason we had to go with them was because all of us, the priests, Christine Bandera, like our copy editor, our friend Zach, who does the the outreach and stuff and sends email. Everyone has another job, and so we had to get it on a platform that we were able to really send this all over the world.
Absolutely. So let's look at this here. So we have, if you look at this, you have the holy mysteries of initiation, baptism, chrismation, Holy Communion. Goes through the illumination, making you a catechumen. Then there's the exorcism. It explains what's going on, the first exorcism. Then it has an actual service.
Yes, it has the services as well.
Yeah, second, third exorcisms, the renunciation of the devil, and the joining of the catechumen to Christ. It explains what's going on. Then it has a service.
And we took from Saint Cyril of Jerusalem. So they're seeing our catechumens. It's interesting. There's a wide variety of ways that people make catechumens in different parishes. There's intensive one-on-one study. There are, there's kind of the group that the priest who's generally exhausted at night has the catechism group for the kids or the adults that want to join. It's one of those things that we wanted to kind of compress that into this book, because some people who are trying to convert to the church, they're struggling because of work issues or school issues and time to study and things like that. So we wanted to give them a resource they can pick up and they can have the service, so that when they learn about what they're going to be participating in, they understand why.
Yes. So here we have then during the profession of the faith, right? And then we have the holy mystery baptism. So all of those things are leading up to being baptized. Then it goes through the oil of gladness, right? Yeah. So the sacred words of baptism, the patristic witness on the effects of baptism, holy mystery of chrismation. What is chrism?
And just so that you know, a lot of our three of our authors were former Protestants. And why we talked about the effects of baptism was really critical. If you talk to a lot of modern evangelicals, they will say, well, baptism is just a symbol of the rite or of your faith. It is not required. And so it's one of those things that by catechizing properly, you're actually answering questions of people who really want to know, what did the early church believe about baptism?
There you go. So it continues on here. We have like the holy ablutions, right? So going through the first prayer of ablution, third prayer, tonsure. It takes you through, and then Holy Communion. So it takes you through the entire how you're going to be initiated, explains exactly how, it has a service, it gives all of the information. Because a lot of people will ask, like, well, what happens during the service? Buy the book. It's going to explain it exactly to you. You're going to know
And
it right
yeah,
away.
yeah.
And then from there, people go, well, what about confession? What is that like? Well, if you go to page 230, well, it's actually in the PDF, it's actually 219. Holy Mystery of Repentance. It takes you through, it explains with pictures. There's Father Joshua Genich, or Genig, in German it'd be Genich. There he is. You see, he has his epitrachelion on his stole on the head of the person giving confession. That's a gospel book there. Okay. Breaks down exactly what is going on, how to prepare for confession, right? Examination of conscience. Has examination of conscience in there for you.
And
Right
I'll say
before
this,
confession.
I'll say this, that examination of conscience, we think of that as like a Western accretion. That was very pushed by Nicodemus the
Yes.
Hagurite, was a big believer in examination of conscience. I actually think he actually wrote like and it kind of aped the Jesuits, the 30 days of the Jesuit like retreat. I love reading his stuff, and you got an examination from conscience as him, as well as Nectarius of Pentapolis, who was very big on examination of conscience. So that is definitely an Orthodox tradition.
Yeah, there you go.
And and as an aside, for the sins that we included in there, not all sins are obviously represented, but we also wanted to talk about certain things that maybe we might not think about in terms of being difficult with our family members, in terms of difficulty with spouses or in relationships or things like that, instead of just kind of the things that we would assume that everyone would know.
There you go. Okay, so it goes through, and then you have this great florilegium on the mystery of repentance. It goes
Yes.
through, different elder ephemeras in there, St. Ignatius Branchaninov, St. Peter of Damascus, really great stuff. Then it takes you through Great Vespers, and there's a commentary. And this is really one of the things I love about this book. It has commentary throughout it, right? So there's a picture of Father Joshua, what he's doing. Then it has actual service. So you can take this with you into a service. You don't, I mean, you can sit home and read it if you want, sure. But you can bring it, I mean, you should, but you should also bring it with you to church and use it as your service book, because people's focus goes in and out. And sometimes they have to be brought back to focus. And so, what better way to bring yourself back to focus than reading about the liturgy while you're in the liturgy? Sort of getting an explanation of what is going on while you're seeing it makes you appreciate it more. Okay?
And one of the, and that's a great point. The one thing that we're trying to get out to the extent that we can, and I think we had a few media releases or press releases in the past couple weeks that touched on this. We really want to get this into parishes. Like, I'm sure you're familiar, a lot of GOA parishes, a lot of OCA parishes, it's like they've got, the Greek and the English for the liturgy, and then they've got the Orthodox Study Bible. I don't know why, but it's like what we got, and the point is if you want to help, the liturgical movement, which is what we're trying to really emphasize and really kind of start in many of our parishes, especially in the Midwest and the East Coast, is a real treasuring and rediscovering of sacred liturgy, to buy a few, to ask your priest or to show it to your priest and to say, we can buy a few to have it in the pew, instead of, for personal study. It's meant to be something that's going to take you deep into liturgy rather than distract you from it.
Yeah. And, this is better than buying a Labubu. So please buy this. Please do not buy Labubus. It's a waste of, I mean, every dollar you waste is a minute of your life you're never ever going to get back. So look at this. So as you go through, it explains the Great Litany. Okay, then we have the Cathesma blesses a man. There's that psalm, explains everything going on, the small litany, and then the lamp lighting.
Yes.
Okay, here's a commentary on it. Look at this amazing commentary.
Mhm.
Isn't this is fabulous? Here the deacon begins to sense the church, and then it explains, and it has the actual service itself. Okay, now if we go to Matins on 265, it does the same exact thing for Matins. So you can go to Orthros, also known as Matins. Matina in Latin means in the morning. So here you go with the commentary again. Great. Has the pictures as Father Joshua Genich. Okay. We go forward to 292, preparation for the liturgy. Okay. This is something that you've typically not seen. This begins before, doesn't it typically begin before Orthros though?
It does typically begin before Orthros. It's interesting. There was a question of some people, and they said, is this really relevant to include? And what's interesting
Father Peter Hears asked that, right?
yeah, there was that question. But what's interesting is that when you look at the liturgical commentaries of Ioannis Phountoules, and I have all 5 or 6 volumes right here, he actually addresses this question directly. And that is that, in fact, the people were actually present during that service and actually chanting psalms during it. So there's nothing that is ever done like a private mass, if you will. There was never, it wasn't just like the priest, just doing something by himself. There was always the liturgical community that was attached to him.
There you go.
It was because the divine liturgy is an act of the entire church. And you see this in some places. There's like this ultra clericalism that is present in some areas of the Roman Rite, that it's like the priest himself identifies like he's Jesus Christ and he can offer liturgy alone. That's very foreign to I would say the perennial understanding of what the liturgy is. It is an act of the entire church on behalf of the entire church.
There you go. Yeah, the priest, an Orthodox priest must have at least one other person with him to celebrate the liturgy.
Yes.
There's no like private masses or anything like that.
Right.
I just put a link for those watching. I put a link in the chat for where you can purchase this amazing book. Okay. Now I want to read this because this is the type of commentary you're going to get. It says the rites of preparation for divine and sacred liturgy. Okay. And this is a short paragraph, or actually decent paragraph I want to read. It says commentary. The first prayers the clergy offers, they prepare to enter the altar area for the divine liturgy or the services immediately preceding it, are called the kairos, meaning the appropriate time. The kairos in Greek is one of the many words for time. Okay. The priestly service book includes the instruction to the priest that he be reconciled with all before starting, and he must be careful to guard his mind from evil thoughts, because the first preparation for worship is within the heart. The prayers begin with the clergy bowing to the bishop's throne as they serve only in his stead and with his blessing. They offer the Trisagian prayers, then prayers calling on God's mercy and the intercession of the Theotokos, before offering prayers appropriate to the principal icons of the iconostation. While venerating each. This is the entrance of the clergy into the celestial throne room of God, and as such, they greet the King of all, his mother, and his royal court. Only after greeting these do they ritually enter the altar area and venerate the altar itself. So listen to that. This is the entrance of the clergy.
That was Father Lucas Christians. I mean, that's the elegance that you get in his writing.
Right. Yeah. So listen to this, guys. This is the entrance of the clergy into the celestial throne room of God, and as such, they greet the King of all, his mother, and his royal court. Only after greeting these do they ritually enter the altar area and venerate the altar itself. Wow, beautiful. I love it. Amazing. Yeah. Okay. This is the kind of great stuff you can get in this book. Then there's other things. I want to show you guys this. I've shown this before. Okay. So this is what we don't see when we're out. I'm shaking my camera. I apologize. I'm getting excited. You can see this here. When you look at let me open this here. Let's see.
I'll be back in 1 minute. 1 second.
No,
Okay.
sure. No problem.
All right.
Can you guys see this picture here of the paten and the chalice? Is that on? Oh, it's not on screen. Hold on just a second. Let me go to share screen. I'm going to go to just window. Okay. If you look at this here, you'll notice something. You zoom in, and on the paten here, so this here, you'll notice there's the lamb, there's the different portions. Like, what are those? Why is there like a little pyramid? Why is there like piles of crumbs? What's going on? Okay. Well, if you go to this, is on screen now. I'm having a really hard time here with this. If you go to, let's see here, this book, you'll see here it explains exactly what this is for. So that triangle, that little pyramid, is for the Mother of God. Then in the middle, Ici, Exi, Nika. Right. Then you have the ranks of the angels. You have the living and the dead. Okay. So you can see it. I apologize. I'm not very good at switching between these images.
It's okay.
You can see, so going from that, you go back to this, you go, oh, that's what's going on here. The portion for the Mother of God, for the angels, etc., for the living, the dead. Okay. So this breaks it down for you in this book. I can't say enough, so many of the questions you guys have about what is going on, it's just, you do well. I'm just going to share my whole, I don't want to share my whole screen because I think that opens up a bunch of windows. There we go. Okay. I think that just has like the mirror inside the mirror. Okay. But that wasn't the one that I wanted to share. I wanted to share. Let's see, where is it? Oh, I accidentally closed the book. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Here, let me open this here. There we go. Okay. Okay. So then we go from there. Preparation. We have the prayers for the dead. Okay. Now you had mentioned this, Doctor, the importance of prayers for the dead and relatives interceding. Oh wait, I have it backwards.
And we actually, just picking up on that, we actually talk about, prior to the lives of the saints, we actually talk about the kind of biblical understanding of why we pray or for the intercession of the saints. It's right before kind of the lives of the saints here. And what's interesting, and this is what one of our authors mentioned this, is that during the Transfiguration, you see Moses and Elijah, and they are conscious and they are present. Yes. And so that these people are alive in God when they pass away. They're not just kind of some shade of some type. So correct. We did discuss veneration of the saints. Let me see what page it's on.
Well, here, let me just go through prayers for the departed. It explains the service for you guys.
Yeah.
And if you go to a Greek parish, you'll notice this is done right after the liturgy. And then we have a bunch of koliva. Now, koliva is something that it's boiled barley.
Wheat,
yeah. Barleyed wheat. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I apologize.
It's
right. Boiled wheat, and then like raisins and nuts and other wonderful things are added into it. And then you can see it, right? I have a picture of it that I selected for you guys. It's right here. Okay. So you can see some koliva here. how it's laid out. There's a candle in it. The priest goes up, does the prayers. You can see here's what it looks like. Usually, this is almost looks like cereal. Okay, here's a priest doing the service. You can see all these candles, and they're usually placed out on a table. If you've gone to a Greek parish, you'll see it. Typically, though, the day for the dead is Saturday, but in Greek parishes, because the priest goes, well, everyone is here on Sunday already. We'll just do it at the end of the service, right there. And then we have this other section here. It explains the service for the blessing of the waters. So sure. Did I accidentally close the? Here it is. Divine services. There we go. Okay, so it has the memorial after the liturgy. Okay, so it takes you through that. The koliva. Okay. Then the sanctification of the waters, the mystery of the sanctification of the waters. That's a big one, right? It's Epiphany. And then you have at the very end, 410, it actually breaks down the service of marriage.
Can I just mention something really
Sure.
interesting about this? The mystery of the great sanctification of the waters.
Sure.
That is a real critical, within, and I'll just kind of break this down maybe to some of your listeners. Within Latin sacramental theology, you have the sacraments, which are 7, and then you have sacramentals, which are kind of less than sacraments. Within the Christian East, there were in a few confessions a numbering of the mysteries, and they were said to be 7. But still, there was significant pushback onto the fact that monastic tantra is not just like some little ceremony that we have. It's something that's taken very seriously. The blessing of the waters was the same way. It was an enormous part of the church, both East and West. And so holy water is very highly venerated within the churches, the Eastern Orthodox churches. And so we thought that was really important because a lot of people, don't have kind of an understanding of the rite or where it developed from, etc. And so that was really important that we put some of those extra services into there. We wanted to also put the prayers of Pentecost in there, but it would have made the book too unwieldy, so we just alluded to them.
Those are some very long prayers. Those are some very,
Yes.
very long prayers.
But beautiful.
They are. Yes. And someone commented, no throwing away the koliva. That is correct.
That's right.
That's correct. You eat it. And if you can't eat it, put it, bury it somewhere. Let nature take care of it. We don't put things that we care for in the garbage, which is why I don't like people printing like on the weekly bulletin like icons and whatnot. What's going to happen? It's going to be recycled. Why would you do that, right? I don't like that. Okay, so yeah, great blessing of the waters, that's in there, and then we have the marriage service, and this takes you through the whole marriage service, the betrothal, all the pictures of what's going on.
There's Father Lucas Christensen. He's right there. Not that guy, not him. He's the priest on the left, right there.
Not the ginger.
Yeah, no, he's the priest right there on the left. He is. So it's interesting because this section was actually written by 2 really extraordinary priests who actually got their doctorate in the Orthodox ceremony of marriage, and one is Father Patrick Viscuso, and the second is Father Patrick O'Grady, who actually came out with a small book on Orthodox marriage. And I read it and I was thoroughly impressed. And I said, this material needs to come out instead of the little books, that you buy on Amazon or wherever. I said it really needs to be part of the greater project, and he agreed, and so we ended up putting the rite in. There were things, and again, I have an interest in liturgy and orthros and vespers. I don't have a strong interest in like the minor hours or marriage really, but they do. And what's interesting is that there were things in the marriage service that really surprised me that are in there. Like, for example, the the joining of the couple in marriage actually comes from them grasping each other's hand. That was seen as like the equivalent of
Oh,
the anaphora, when everyone else thinks it's the crowning, because that's what we have been kind of conditioned to believe. But Father Patrick Viscuso had that section on why that is the reason in the book. And so that's something, and so the crowns acknowledge the reality of the marriage that took place due to the joining of the hands.
I gotcha.
So I thought that was really interesting. It's one of those things that even when you read a lot of the stuff, when you have people of the caliber from a variety of different traditions, from the Greek tradition, the Russian tradition, the Antiochian tradition, they always bring something really interesting.
Correct.
And I think it's also important. I know you've done some work on in the past, and you've had previous episodes on dating and relationships, etc. And I think that to have, a resource like this in your parish, so that women who are interested in marriage, or men that are interested in marriage, etc., have an understanding of not only the rite, but also how Christian couples live together. That's what the authors really focused on. So that was the part of the book that really talked about Christian married life, and how does it look, and how are couples sustained by their reception of the Holy Eucharist and prayer together, and things like that are real concepts that are kind of addressed in that section. So I thought it was that was a really beautiful section, I think.
It was very, very good indeed. Yeah. Let's see, do we have any super chats coming in? Guys, get your comments in. If you have any questions. So yeah, so look at the section here on the Holy Mystery Matrimony, right? So it goes through, it includes a betrothal, then the crowning, has a service itself, the hymn of ascent, the great litany, the sacred blessings, the crowning, the readings, the augmented litany, okay, the common cup, the dance of Isaiah, and then the book ends with that. So it has all the services that you really need at a normal church outside of, like, say, Holy Week, or I'd just
Great
say Lent
Lent,
in
yeah.
general. Yeah,
The
outside
the
of Great Lent.
the second volume, and again, we're not even in the planning season. We're probably going to come out with a prayer book next, that's going to be affordable and nice, because there's so many books out there, and it's like you've got one here and one there, and
There's a really good one from New Rome Press, I want to say.
that one is actually really good. It's interesting. The priest in charge of New Rome Press is Father, I forgot his name, but we were going to ask him to contribute a section, but it didn't materialize. But I have a lot of respect for his press, and they do a lot of really good work.
We have a question here from someone. Did Christ, in a sense, abolish Abraham's bosom when he descended into hell?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so, and I haven't heard anything to that effect. Abraham's bosom was the reward of the righteous, and so
Mhm.
I don't think that there was an abolishing of that. Again, I would hate to give answers, and I think most of my answers would be consistent with Orthodox teaching, but yeah, I haven't heard anything to the contrary of that.
Okay. Okay. Uh, then we have Katie. Does the book cover the life confession as well?
So that's an interesting question. Katie has a lot of good questions.
I
Um,
know.
yes, and that's so. Thank you for that. So there is a history, and this is depending on where you go. There's kind of the practice of a life confession, and that's been not out of the ordinary, especially for many Greek Orthodox who hadn't been to confession in a very, very long time. Okay. That you would do a confession of your life. It's like the last time you confessed, you were 7 years old. We had emails to that effect coming in, and it's like I made up my life confession. I would say that that's one of those things that, as far as a life confession, it's something to discuss really with your spiritual father.
I think she's talking more about people who come into the church as an
Yes.
adult and they want to do the confession for the,
Right. No, so that's a good question. As far as the life confession as an adult, we didn't touch on that. We're not trying to address, because there's certain variation in practice between different parishes and different jurisdictions. And so we wanted to address kind of the general service. Like, for example, on baptism, we really emphasized the baptism of infants, for example. It wasn't the baptism of of older people. We talked a lot about infant baptism and the reason why we do that. But as far as life confession, I think that's something to discuss with your spiritual father. We do have a portion of the book that's like kind of a sample confession, or things to keep in mind when you're confessing, but we didn't address that directly.
Excellent. We got another question that's more technical. In the West, Matins is divided into 3 nocturnes, each containing 3 psalms and 3 portions, or a patristic homily, primarily Blessed Augustine. Is there any equivalent within the East?
So I would say that matins can be matins, and what we had to do in the book, and there's actually a mention of this, and I just want to go to Father Lucas's commentary, because what we did was provide the general outline of the service. I mean, you could have the canon, for example, in matins, and that can take another hour or something like that. And to be honest with you, the deep liturgical, the deep kind of liturgics part, I'm not really that as familiar with, not as I'm not a priest, but essentially there's a variety of ways that matins can be celebrated. There are patristic homilies, though, that I have heard in matins or even in vespers. That's not uncommon. But it's not like the breviary. I think what he's referring to is like the Tridentine breviary that would always have a patristic commentary at like regular intervals. It's not like that.
Okay. We have a guy took issue with my pronunciation of Kairos.
Keros.
It's Kairos. It's not. Keros is modern Greek, which is imagine a culture has been oppressed for hundreds of years under absolute sociopaths and there's no learning. That's what modern Greek pronunciation is the product of.
And
Great food.
can also mean the weather. So it's in modern Greek.
In ancient Greek is what I read as Kairos in ancient Greek. Let's see, we got
And it's exactly, it means time, but it's not just kind of time, just as we would reckon.
well,
time
time in general is like chronos in ancient Greek.
Yeah, right.
And then there's kairos, and then there's forget the other term. There's 3 of them. Let's see. No other questions. Okay. Let's get back really quickly. Do you have more time, Doctor, in our 10 minutes?
Whatever I can do, I will be happy to do.
Because I hear the wife and kids are up. The chickens are restless.
Okay, no problem.
If you've known the Far Side comic, the chickens are restless.
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. So I say when my wife and daughters are getting like, oh, the chickens are restless. Okay. So you're presenting baptism, Eucharist, Vespers, Orthros, and confession as a coherent system. But I mean, wouldn't someone say that's retroactive? Okay. Because these developed at different speeds in different regions for different reasons. Wasn't the appearance of unity imposed later by people writing commentaries rather than discovered as already there?
So yeah, so there's a lot to that question. I would say that I like to go back to Maximus the Confessor, who's writing this in the 7th century. And he's doing real theological construction, and he's kind of integrating the Vespers, the Orthros, the baptism, etc. But one of the things that we always have to remember is and this is one of my favorite stories, and everyone who's in liturgy and who's a liturgist or interested in liturgics knows the story of essentially Egeria, who was this pilgrim going to Jerusalem in the 4th century.
Yes.
And she's describing these daily offices that are occurring in Jerusalem, and that these are just kind of constant services going on. So I would say that these definitely these parts existed, and they interlocked functionally. But it's one of those things that as time goes on, the rites themselves kind of matured.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
so I always go back to Egeria because she's taken very, very seriously in the Church of Jerusalem, because that was a
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, pulling all 5 services together, what's the case you're making for why this matters to someone living now who may not be like especially religious?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I would say is that and I think we touched on this actually earlier, but it's that every gesture in the service corresponds to some type of reality. Just like, for example, every gesture that you do as a father of your family or as a husband, etc., has a real effect. And so it's one of those things that our faith being really reality itself, everything that we do matters. You saw this especially within the liturgical practice of the Old Testament, where liturgy was taken deathly
Absolutely.
seriously. That just kind of continues for us, and
Yeah,
all
they
of
were
our actions. Just as an aside, all of our actions that we do in life are actual. And there's an interesting, and there are a few authors that speak of this. Like, for example, in Genesis, the creation of the days, it's like a liturgical procession. The animals that go on the ark, it's like a liturgical procession. Everything that we do
yeah.
as human beings, and I'm not trying to be some moral exemplar or anything like that, but we try to look at that as either good liturgy or bad liturgy. And so it's either you're living a good liturgy in your life or a bad liturgy.
Well,
Um,
that's like you look at the Old Testament. I mean, they were bumping people off for doing things incorrectly. Like it's
right.
be taken very seriously. And
Yes,
I like that
yes.
you brought up the animals going onto the ark as a liturgy. It is right
Mhm.
because the ark is the church, right? That's where
Right,
you
exactly.
mentioned, in the book you mentioned that nave comes from the Latin term for a ship,
Ship,
right? It's the
yes.
ark. The nave is that main area of the church that we the laity stand is called the nave. It's a ship. It's the ark,
Yes.
right? The ark is taking us forward. The animals process into the ship to be preserved. That's, the animals are a type of us,
Yes.
so to say. I would hope that I would be one of the cooler animals, but I'd be happy just to be like, an insignificant one just to get on. But real quickly, Foxtrot, much mahalas to you both. Thank you, Foxtrot, for that $20. It's excellent. Very kind of you for
Thank
sending
you.
that in. Um, that's another thing. I mean, people will often say, and I like that you addressed this in the book, or you guys did. People go, well, oh, liturgy means work of the people. It's like, no, it doesn't.
Yes.
It's not what it
Yes.
means. That is not
No,
what it means.
if Father Josh, or no, it's Father Lucas Christensen will
Obi is an
hit the
ant,
ceiling.
confirmed.
He will hit. That is the one thing you can tell him anything. But if you say liturgy is the work of the people, he will hit the ceiling. And that's why he specifically defined it in the book.
It's
It is
not, yeah,
God's work on
yeah,
behalf of
the
its
way
people.
the term is used in the ancient world is as a dedication ceremony for a public work.
Right.
It's something done for the people, not by
Right.
the people, not of the people. It
Yes.
is it is something that someone in charge is doing for the general population.
Right.
This whole I mean, yeah, it's really stunning that the whole oh, liturgy means work of the people. Like, how did that ever become
Well, do you
popular?
know what? Can I tell you why that it became that? It was because in the ashes of the Second World War, and again, we could
Mhm.
go on because I found this very interesting. In the ashes of the Second World War, a lot of Western European countries, and the clergy included, And even to the east, I mean, you saw this after the Russian Revolution, the Living Church, which tried to change the liturgy and failed. But a lot of Western liturgies, they said, how could we have these people who were nominally Christians, even going to church multiple times a week, that they obviously were not, acting, that led to just the enormous death and destruction of just an enormous scale. And that's when you saw really the flowering, or if you could call it that. It was kind of liturgical deconstruction that happened in the West that said, in order to reach the people, we need to make kind of a product of the people, which is just kind of lowest common denominator liturgy. And that didn't really work, unfortunately. And
Absolutely.
so that really came into vogue in the 50s and 60s, and then kind of some pretty non-good liturgists got involved in that, and it's led to catastrophic results.
Okay, new question. St. Cyril of Jerusalem's baptismal catechesis was written for adult converts undergoing instruction over weeks, often facing real social risks for converting. I mean, yeah, and the persecutions were just right behind them, and persecutions have been on and off, so they didn't know when St. Cyril was writing this stuff. They didn't know if persecutions were coming back soon. It wasn't like they knew they were in the clear, and they really weren't. But so most baptisms in your tradition today or our traditions are infants who experience none of that. Doesn't the patristic material you're leaning on describe a totally different practice than what's actually happening in parishes now? So too long didn't read is in the book. You're citing patristic material that talks about infant baptisms, or that's talking about adult baptisms, but now we're mostly seeing infant baptism. So how do these, what's the connection?
No, that's a good question, and the answer is as follows. What I would say is that Cyril's catechumens in the 4th century, they were going through enormous amounts of persecution, etc., and so they wanted to ensure that those catechumens were reliable and that they were invested, etc., because they would pay an enormous social cost for being Christian. One of the things that I would say is that that's not totally foreign to our experience, maybe to our experience in America, but if you look at, for example, the church in Russia, which had enormous persecution, and in some of the communist countries which had enormous persecution, I think it's something to be said that certainly has a place. There's also ample evidence in the early church that infants were baptized. Augustine's letters cite this. And one of the things that we did want to encourage, and we want to do it, and this book is really ideal, is that, a lot of parents are struggling these days. No one's like, I've got a ton of extra money and I've got a ton of extra time to take my kids and to educate them, etc., to do this. A lot of people struggle. And having a catechetical resource that is completely available to them, that they could just kind of pick up, and it's what I learned at church, why do we do certain things, answering the vast majority of questions. That's kind of what we aim to do, at least in this project. But one of the things that we did mention, and also in the beginning, is that the spiritual life is a process, and that also addresses the role of godparents, and that was described by Father Joshua in the book. The godparents, even though you might not have these scrutinies and exorcisms and fasting on a weekly basis, etc., the godparents' job was not to just buy you an extra tie on your birthday. It was to really form you in the Christian tradition to the extent that that was possible, and to encourage you in the faith. So.
Correct. Absolutely correct. There's a lot of people who, they're just, the godparents are just not there. All right. So another question. Nicholas Kabasilas and Simeon of Thessalonica are writing in the 14th and 15th centuries, essentially eulogizing a Byzantine liturgical culture that was about to be politically extinguished by the Ottoman conquest. Isn't there something suspect about leaning on theologians from the empire's twilight to make claims about timeless liturgical meaning?
Okay. I mean, that's a good question. And I would say that those commentaries built on previous commentaries, which built on previous commentaries, which built on previous commentaries. So I think that that's certainly something, and I think it's a sharp criticism, but that liturgy existed all over the world in different places in a similar way, the offering of the victim, the sacrifice, etc. That all of these might have been more or less ornate, but they happened all over the Christian world. And I would say that also, and this goes to the book, but we have very early commentaries. There's one that comes to mind, and it was Saint. He was nominally first century. It was not Ignatius of Antioch. In any case, I think that is that those commentaries built on previous commentaries. I think that's the best explanation for that.
Okay. Two more questions. Confession in the early centuries per St. Cyprian and the Didache often involved public acknowledgement of sin before the community, sometimes years-long penitential exclusion from communion. What you're describing in the book, private confession to a priest, is much later, much gentler practice. Isn't that a significant theological retreat dressed up as continuity?
So that's an interesting question. And I think that when you look at, for example, the patristic writings, it was that, and you see this within the Latin tradition, like the expulsion, Ash Wednesday, where everyone gets ashes. That was part of a service in which people would be excommunicated and then brought later reconciled to the church. The other thing that I would say, though, that's important is that within Egypt, especially with the explosion of monasteries in the 4th through 7th century, people sought out those spiritual guides to confess their sins. And that being said, that there was confession, for example, in a monastery, takes place between the abbot or the eldris or the gerundis of the monastery. And there's a real belief that the abbess, because they were given that designation by the bishop, has that power to remit sin. And so you also saw that. So what we're describing is normal practice within the parish life, but it was not uncommon for people to search out, confessors and elders and ascetics in the early centuries of the church and to confess their sins to them. But it was either to a priest, or really it was the bishop who had the authority initially to forgive sins. That was later designated to the priest, or the monastics had just kind of general blanket permission to hear confessions.
Yeah.
There was an interesting question, and not to keep you going because I know you've got things to do. There was an interesting question that popped up prior to this question about the traditional Orthodox who make such a big deal about the calendar.
Yeah, the TO types.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is growing up in Michigan, my sister, when she was married, had 2 old calendarist Greek girls in her wedding. They would come to the Greek Orthodox summer camp. They were, I think one of them was like, my sister's she stood in the wedding. So there was never an understanding, at least from traditional Greeks. It's like, okay, they go to the old calendar. There was never this real aspersion that you see online against old calendarists for Greek Orthodox. Unfortunately, most of them collapsed. Unfortunately, I mean, it was actually quite sad. Many of those parishes just collapsed, and many of them now go to Greek Orthodox, just regular Greek Orthodox parishes.
One of the reasons those old calendarist parishes collapsed is when you get a culture of hyper correctness like that, they tend to be
That's
toxic.
Right, 100%, 100%, and it's. I knew a lot of people in there. They were very sincere, and it was that kind of hyper correctness that it's, the
Did someone is asking? Chetnik is saying that he grew up in Utica, Michigan, and he attended a huge church in Sterling Heights in Detroit.
oh yeah, I know it's Ravanica. I know that place.
You might have met each other.
I'm sure we probably are within one person of knowing each other, because
Okay.
it's a large parish. It's interesting that even the Serbs, the Greeks had the
Oh,
old
he went to
town.
St. Stephen Dekanski Serbian
Oh,
Church.
Dečani of Dečani. Yeah, Saint Stephen of Dečani. Okay. Those are the two big parishes up there.
Okay. Okay. And then we have a story here from Daniel Smallwood.
Yes.
It's a very Anglo name. I like it. I love it. Smallwood. I love the English names. They're always like Longwood, Smallwood, Tallwood,
Yes.
like.
So one of the things that I would say, this is a good question.
Well, let me read the question. Let me read the question
Okay.
so people listening, because a lot of
Okay.
people don't watch this; they listen.
Okay.
So, is there a good book for the history of liturgical development? I'd specifically like to know how the services of the hours developed in the East and the West.
Yes. It's right here. This is Ioannis Phountoules. There's 5 or 6 volumes. It
Hmm.
has liturgical questions touching all of the hours and stuff like that. I was peripherally involved because I supported the project financially. And we actually have some of the questions and answers or allusions to them within the book. I think that our book does a great job of that for like an initial book. Um, I would say there's one on the liturgy that's awful. I'll
I'm
have
trying to
to.
find the one by Taft on the hours.
Taft is really good. So Taft
He
was an
wrote one like
interest.
the what was it called, like the development of the hours, East and
He
West,
wrote
something
a
like that.
lot on the hours. I would recommend actually a lot of his white papers. It's interesting because when I knew Taft, because I used to grill him on liturgical questions, and because initially he said that the commentaries on the liturgy are not our best examples of like Byzantine writing. And I asked him and I said, but the commentaries meant so much to Orthodox Christians. And he said, I actually went back later in my career and he showed me the white paper that he wrote, that he said, we have to really reevaluate this because, again, all of within the 1960s in Greece and in Eastern Europe, because, Eastern Europe was dealing with communism and Greece was dealing with communism and its own internal divisions and all that stuff. Nothing really filtered from the West into the East at that point. But with
Correct.
but that being said, the church in America, if the West coughed, the church in America caught a cold, so they were really, and because it was the Anglosphere. And so
I found it. This
yeah.
is the book.
Yes. Yes.
It's pretty. You can see it's pretty beefy. Look at that thumb right there by it. It's a good sized book. It's the liturgy of the hours in East and West, the origins of the divine office and its meaning for today by Father Robert Taft. Really good book for answering that question. Sorry, continue, Doctor.
No, and I would just say that Taft was the biggest fan of I mean, he's a very reliable author. He was definitely not ultramontanist. He was just he was an extraordinary man to know.
I mean, did you ever talk with him about Vatican I?
He was of the opinion, he was like of the Melkite opinion of
Mhm.
taking the 7 ecumenical councils as truly ecumenical. He liked Trent, but he did not like ultramontanism because he knew that if given the opportunity, the Eastern rites within the Catholic Church would not exist in America.
Really?
And
What do
yeah,
you mean given the opportunity? Of who was given the
well,
opportunity?
because and you saw this essentially when the Uniate churches first came into the American church in the OCA. They would have increasing Latinizations, etc.
Mhm.
And the plan was, goes back to Archbishop Ireland, and I'm sure you're familiar with that
Correct, yeah.
conversation that he had.
John Ireland.
Yeah, that John Ireland said there's no future for Eastern Catholics in America, we are Roman Catholic. We are, and so you can be tolerated, but we really don't need you here,
Yeah.
and that's true. I mean, and he was just kind of echoing prior sentiment. I mean, from Poles introduced, Latinizations, etc., and Romanization of Western Ukrainians, etc., very successfully.
Now,
So
your what was it? Your thesis for your undergraduate was on Uniatism.
yeah, it was on Uniatism in Carpatho, Russia. It's been so many years. It has been so many years, but it kind of covered the Bogdan Khmelnytsky uprisings, etc. And
Mhm.
the Patriarch of Jerusalem actually was involved in that, and it's actually quite compelling of Ukrainian history during that period.
And a lot of big people like Cyril Lucaris was actually a missionary originally to Ukraine.
Yes, Cyril Lucaris is an interesting character. I mean,
Yes.
originally a missionary to Ukraine, was very fanatically against the Jesuits and Romanizations, to the point that he effectively embraced Protestantism, or kind of partially embraced it in his writings. And and again, that led to serious problems for the ecumenical patriarchate at the time, and then the subsequent councils of Jerusalem and Jassy. So it was an interesting time, but they were, unfortunately, the Orthodox were so illiterate at the time, because they had no, they didn't have institutions in the way that, Orthodox countries have institutions at this point, that they were really picked off easily by, the Jesuits or Protestantism, etc. It was a bad time in Orthodoxy for a long time.
Someone just mentioned something that I've heard before. It is important to note that John Ireland, the bishop who got into the argument with St. Alexis Toth, it is important to note that John Ireland was a true Americanist. He wasn't merely against the East and all for the Latin. He was even against the cultural Latin churches at his time. I
That's
have
it.
read that before.
Well, there was always an antipathy, and you saw this. I mean, it's interesting in Catholicism in Detroit. All of these parishes, for a very long time, you would have the Irish parishes, you would have the Italian parishes, you'd have the Polish parishes, and generally the hierarchy would come from the Irish parishes, and they really wanted to fit into America.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, America was the promised land for not only the Irish, but a lot of European immigrants, and
Well,
fitting in
that's
was important.
people, because I grew up in like the remnant, or I grew up in like that last generation of people who were actually like somewhat aware. Like I remember hearing people speaking Gaelic regularly and even studied it a bit. It was
Yes.
I mean, we had what, 3 or 4 of the parish priests we had growing up were actually native Gaelic speakers.
Yeah. No,
Father
that was true.
McGinnis,
Yeah.
Father Jarlath Heenahan, and Father William Lane, Liam, like, or
Yeah.
Bill. We call him Bill, Father Bill. But and then we had the rest of the parish priests were like mixture of like Irish and Italian.
Right.
And it was a very different world. You looked at the family names of these parishes, and they were all Mick and O. And then there'd be like some like Polish names, and then once in a while like Italian names, but it was still very much segregated in the sort of naturally segregated. Now you go to these parishes, it's almost all Latino names, whether they're actually Latinos or they're Filipinos. That's really who's coming in. And so, you for my parents' generation, like my mother remembers coming home from school and seeing her parents crying on November 22nd when JFK was shot. It was a
Yeah.
big deal. And for JFK's father, his dream was to be accepted as like American, like not to be considered Irish, but to be considered like American. That was his goal. He was made I think the ambassador to England. And so the joke was when JFK was elected president, people go, well, it's the first Irish Catholic president. But to the people who actually lived in Boston who are ethnically Irish, they go, he's nothing like us whatsoever. He's just like, he's this Ivy League guy. He's not a working class person. He doesn't have Gaelic speaking relatives or speak Gaelic or have any real connection with it.
Okay.
So the joke was that America elected an Irish Catholic president, and they got what was it? Irish Catholic, and they got a Protestant Englishman. Was
That's
the
interesting.
joke?
That's interesting. That's interesting. Wow.
So
Wow.
it's, people forget that like how badly people wanted to integrate. My great grandparents, my great grandfather, his on my mother's side, he came from Cork in Ireland, and they were peasants. And the story goes that his family name was Dennehy, like the actor
Mhm.
Brian Dennehy. And he got to Seattle, and he found out that there was a group of English known as the Denny Party.
Mhm.
Looks like we're English now. Changed the
Wow.
last name.
Wow. That's
As my
interesting.
name Denny is my mother's maiden name. Okay, so people, my father's side, they were largely Irish and German, but they had some English as well. So they had an English last name, so they kept it, right? We forget that. People really wanted to integrate. And now we have the situation that I'm not going to go into that's not good. But that should be
Well,
understood.
I would just say one thing. The difference, I think, now is compared to previously, and this is again a difference just being growing up in a different part of the country. Within those Greek or Irish or Italian parishes, especially in, for example, Michigan, you would come over with people, from your area. I mean, and we saw this within the Polish immigration, the Serbian immigration, Macedonian immigration, etc., into Michigan. And you really didn't have to move because the jobs were there. And so those parishes existed for a very long time. And that's the other thing that I think isn't, we didn't get a chance to touch on this really, but you a Lutheran wouldn't go into a Greek Orthodox or Catholic parish because it was so foreign to them and it was so monoculture, if that makes sense. Like there was no question of like, what do they
Even
actually believe?
even growing up, I
Yeah.
remember taking a liking to a girl. I ended up, well, I went on a date with her once, but she grew up learning. She was Lutheran. Grew up doing prayers in German.
No, when I went to a Lutheran school as a boy, and I had to go because the public schools were a little rougher,
Mhm.
but we learned the prayers in German, and they had German class. And up until the 60s or 70s, the liturgy itself was in German. So you wouldn't have fit it. There was no question of theology because it was just like, well, we're the people, from
Well,
there.
it's
Yeah.
you in our conversations. I hope you don't mind me mentioning
No,
this.
no, no, no.
You and you'd mentioned this, and you captured it perfectly. And that is, and I'll add this analogy onto it. You said their attitude. Or actually, well, okay, sorry. You said something that captured it perfectly. And the attitude of the Greek hierarchy, the attitude of the Catholic hierarchy, the attitude
Yeah.
of the Lutheran hierarchy was, well, this person's Greek. Where else are they going to go, huh?
They had
Yeah.
nowhere
Oh, they're
else to go.
Irish. Where else are they going to go? Oh, they're
Yeah.
German. It's like Gavin Newsom when he was asked, what's going to happen in California? The taxes are through the roof. You have homeless drug addicts everywhere.
Mhm.
You know, like people aren't happy. And Newsom responded with, "Oh, where else are they going to go, huh?
Well,
Where else?" And the lady goes, Nevada, Tennessee, like Oregon, like, I mean, Florida. And Newsom's like,
yeah.
"Oh yeah, they can go." Yeah. Like it didn't occur to him
Well,
at the end.
and that is something that I think is a pointed critique of Orthodoxy is important, and and we saw it's that I think within the Western Church, particularly Catholicism, it manifested in the abuse crisis. Within the East, it was just kind of a general. It was just kind of a general neglect in terms of you don't really need to know this. You're going to get married. You're not going to, we're not going to push anything too hard on you, etc. I'm not saying that you have to do really strict akrivia when it comes to the sacraments, etc. But that there wasn't an intention to really catechize people really well.
Well,
And
they were seen as so, your ethnic identity was so strong. My
yeah,
mother has a cousin who married a Lebanese woman.
mhm,
And that cousin's mom was so like, oh my God, like so they've married outside the fold that she
Yeah.
told everyone, well, she's Italian,
Yeah.
right? It's like it was this very odd, like, I mean, you really can't emphasize enough to people like growing up now how heavy the push was. Like I had a great grandmother who her grandmother had emigrated from Switzerland and spoke 4 languages.
Yeah.
Okay. My grand my great-grandmother said, "I was only taught English, I was only allowed to speak English. That's it, even though I heard German, French, Italian spoken around me constantly.
Wow.
That's all you were allowed to speak," okay? My grandmother goes she's like, "Why are you learning other languages?" Like, it's that my great-grandparents spoke Gaelic. They were from different parts of Ireland, so they
Yeah.
couldn't understand each other unless they spoke English.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but
No, it's
their
yeah.
kids were not allowed to speak Gaelic ever by the parents.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, that's the push to be very American, and this guy here, he puts this in, he says, "Roman, not Latin," he follows it with another comment. He goes, "You can really see this in the papal response to Americanism. It seems that John Ireland and his ilk," I hate that phrase, "and their ilk, feared a second wave of ethnic churches outside of what already existed within the West." He continues, "The irony is that they were just seeking to culturally cleanse what they saw and just anglicize it. I've seen John Ireland misrepresented as a Latin extremist when he was anything else. He was Anglophile to the max."
And that's interesting. Just as a liturgical note, it's interesting at the death of Kennedy, the mass that was said was a low mass. You know, they didn't do the Tridentine high mass, even because it was trying to anglicize, to kind of be
Yes.
generally respectable. So that's just kind of interesting. It's just kind of a liturgical tidbit.
There you go. Joe Wags, $10. Hey, thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Thank you for the super chat. Hey, cool talk, mates. Appreciate it a ton. I love the garlic on top of the dog's head in your profile picture. That is hilarious. Is that like the trick with the cheese on the dog's nose, but your dog likes garlic? Okay. Um, and then we got this one here. That's all our ethnic families. My grandma would cry that I would lose the faith and my children won't be Orthodox when I would joke with her, I'm going to marry an Asian girl.
Can I talk to? Can I just mention something?
Sure.
The reason for that, and there was a real anxiety, and I do want to speak to this.
Oh,
It's so
wait.
interesting.
Roman not Latin has apologized for saying ilk. Okay, apology accepted.
Yes, yes. So, but I was just going to mention this, and this is really kind of critical. There was a fear of marrying outside the community, not just for the loss of common language and ethnicity. And the reason was for many Orthodox Christians, this is really important, they could not explain why we do what we do, which is one of the reasons why this came to be. Okay. They were afraid because it's like, well, he's married a Croat. He's married a Bosnian. She's married a, you know, well, that's gone. It's all gone now. And what we say is, no, we can understand what we do. We can explain what we do to other people and invite them to join our tradition.
That's right. We can convert people. We can convert lots, and we do. We are. I mean, right now, we're like, it's odd because on the one hand, the ethnics are having less and less kids, and people in general are having less and less kids. But it appears that we're balancing out the numbers just through sheer converts. That shows you one, how many people we're losing through like just death and then low birth rates versus how, I mean that we're bringing a ton of converts. Yeah, we're also losing a ton of people through death and low birth rates.
Right.
I mean,
But
it's like you look at these
can I
families,
tell you
tiny.
something just to
Sure.
give you a little bit of heart? What's interesting is that there was also an absolute crash in birth rates in the 19th century during
Yes.
Ottoman persecutions prior to the Greek Revolution. And I don't even know how. I mean, obviously, England blockaded Muhammad Ali Pasha, and so that helped. But there was a real loss of Orthodox will to live. And you saw this in the early 19th century among the Greeks. You saw this in Russia, etc. And now they're back on, and then you add that Patriarch of Georgia, who did a lot of good for his community and was seen as a real Orthodox example, and he turned that around. And so
Well,
hopefully,
it's that the key to getting people to have children is to make motherhood high status.
I think that's part of it. I think that's part of
Well,
it.
no, that's the only thing that does it. Countries that try and do cash incentives, it gives it a little bump. Mongolia turned it around by bringing women onto television once they have, I think it's 5 kids, and they give them an award given by the president and a title, Mother of the Nation. Boom. It's once you make it high status to be a mom, as opposed to being stuck in some like cubicle for 8 hours a day, enslaved to some like middle manager. Once you make it high status to be a mom, women will go for it.
That's I think you know more about that stuff than I do. So
It's let's see. Someone said gentlemanly manners and military service were the greatest equalizers among American men. That's all changed since Korea. Well, that brings me my question here. We have a doctor who's single
oh no,
in
no,
our midst.
I'm dating.
You're
I'm dating
dating?
someone.
Okay.
I'm dating
Well, if
someone.
you are, we're gonna put you on the market and get you married
No,
off.
I'm dating. I'm dating someone
Okay.
right now. But
Okay.
thank you.
All right. You're too kind.
Yeah.
All right. So, any other questions here? Oh, I have one last question, if you don't mind. Okay.
Yes.
You're an Orthodox author writing about Orthodox liturgy using almost exclusively Orthodox approved patristic sources. Isn't the whole project somewhat circular, using the tradition's own approved witness to prove the tradition is right?
So here's how I would answer that one, and thank you for that question. What I would say is that we used an abundance of early authors. Okay,
Correct.
there are always people who are at the margins, like Origen or Tertullian, or in some ways Theodore of Mopsuestia, but that doesn't make it doesn't make the argument non-circular. It makes the circle kind of visible
Correct.
instead of hidden. And one of the things that we try to do is connect those ancient voices of the church in to kind of our modern kind of elders, whether male or female, and we have both in the book from a number of patristic traditions that are all saying the exact same thing. So I think that certainly Orthodoxy has that historic continuity, and that's what we really wanted to emphasize.
There you go. I love it. Okay. Any last questions for the doctor? Questions for me? Keep them on topic. Going once. Going twice. Going. Well, I'll wait for the third time. So I have a video coming out shortly. It's going to be out by the end of the month for Patreon and YouTube channel members. By the way, thank you for you guys for joining channel membership. It helps tremendously. It is the 4th out of 4 videos on the history of the Nestorian Church. Covers it from 1500 to today. With special attention to the Nestorian Church in India. That's a fascinating story right there.
Interesting.
Absolutely Oh yeah, they were Nestorians. They were getting their bishops from Ctesiphon outside Baghdad, and then from there they ended up getting them from the bishops on the Persian coast, would consecrate them, send them, and then the Portuguese showed up in the 1500. I think it was like 1498, and the Nestorians were enamored with the Portuguese. I'm absolutely enamored with them. They thought they were the greatest thing ever because the Christians were persecuted and the Portuguese just unleashed on the Hindus. So then about 50 years later, the Nestorians were not so thrilled with the Portuguese because they brought in all these Latinists. They had the Synod of Diamper, and I think it was like 1598, I want to say, I believe, where they totally Latinize it. Well, then some of these bishops go, okay, we've had enough of this stuff. So they send a bunch of they send out emissaries to, one, get Nestorian bishops back, one. Two, they approach the Syriac monophysites as well. They then approached the Coptic monophysites. They're just trying to get bishops from anywhere. So
Yeah.
it appears like they weren't very theologically literate. Most of them end up going Syriac. That's the origin of the monophysite church in India.
I was
Is the
just going to say, a
16th
lot of them
century.
self-identify as Syriac, even though they
No.
appear Indian.
Well, then some of them went back to being Nestorians.
That's
Okay.
interesting.
And it's a tiny group, but all these have splintered, and then all of them have Catholic counterparts. So there's like, I mean, like out of the millions of Christians in India now, only about 200,000 are Nestorian. So, you know, the Nestorian church went from having dioceses all the way from Cyprus to, you know, Mongolia down into Indonesia, all of a sudden to just being these two tiny spots now, just a little bit in northern Iraq, a little bit in southern India, and that's it. Very tragic story.
It is tragic. It's interesting. I don't know if you've seen recent archaeological digs in like the UAE and these different Arab, and they can't get 20 feet down before they find a monastery or something.
Oh yeah. Oh
it's
yeah.
just
That
kind of interesting.
Karg Island, which we were hearing so much about recently
Yeah.
in the news, that was a site of a huge Nestorian monastery.
Right,
that did
right,
glass
exactly.
manufacturing. The glass manufacturing. It was right at the because glass was a luxury item. That's how they
Right,
support themselves. We have two more questions, if you don't mind, Doctor. When did Rome stop using the liturgy of Saint Gregory the Dialogos?
The Dialogus, yes. So, I mean, that's kind of it's a long answer to the question. I mean, the Roman Rite underwent, you know, several revisions. I mean, in terms of Gregory the Dialogus, I think, was it the Hankagitur that he made like some slight alterations to it. You know, then in the Tridentine period, you got the prayers of the foot of the altar. But again, the Western Rite was not a monolith. I mean, we think of the Roman Rite as like where it was everywhere. But you saw, you know, the Roman Rite in Rome, but you saw the Ambrosian Rite, you saw the Carolingian rites, you saw the rites of England, which were slightly different from that. All of that was kind of done away with by the time of Trent, and then you had a Roman, just kind of a generic Roman rite, and then you had like the prayers of the foot of the altar added. But in terms of, and then obviously in the 60s you had a complete deconstruction of the Roman rite.
If I may interject here, just to clarify something for the audience, there's a difference between the Latin Rite and the Roman Rite. The Roman Rite is a rite within the Latin Rite. The Latin Rite is a family of rites.
That's true. That's true. I should have clarified that. But in any case, the rite of Gregory the Dialogus is used in some, I think, Antiochian communities. They'll use a Western rite.
They'll use a version of the Tridentine liturgy.
Yeah, which is like a version of the Tridentine rite prior to some of the later medieval accretions to it. But
I think it's just like Trent plus like the prayer of St. John Chrysostom plus an epiclesis.
I think they do add the epiclesis there, although the Roman Rite had kind of an epiclesis. It was implicit. It was an implicit and not an explicit epiclesis, but
the bless, ratify, and accept these gifts.
Yes, ratum et vivificantem, I think was the term given. But and it's interesting that Nicholas Cabasilas, that was his opinion, that the Roman Rite was a venerable rite, and so I, you know, prior to, you know, he didn't have a problem with the rite per se.
And then we have someone asking, did St. Patrick celebrate the liturgy in Greek? I'm going to answer this one. No, he did not. He celebrated the local language as far as we can tell. One thing we do know about St. Patrick is his Latin was not very good because he'd been a slave during the prime years of his education. He was a Gaelic. He spoke the language of the people, and then he follows with Rocor Western Rite uses St. Gregory's liturgy. Yeah, they do. The Rocor though sort of plays it fast and loose with things like that, and so there's a lot of liturgical archaeology and some of these old calendarist groups. You have them trying to like revive liturgies that are just completely dead. I know my own opinion on the Western Rite is I like the idea of it, but there's really no future for it because the Tridentine liturgy it is as foreign to the vast majority of people as the Byzantine liturgy is.
I would say that, I don't have a lot of experience with that, right? But I would say that the law of prayer is the law of belief, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why I, have a great love and try to emphasize the importance of the Byzantine rite. But maybe some people somewhere might derive a certain spirituality and might be more comfortable in that rite, but I would let the episcopacy make those determinations,
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
We have one guy, one last question, then we're closing it down here. Except for super chat. So this super chat will take it.
this is good.
Question: how different are Greek and Slavic liturgies, and what are main differences? By Slavic, I mean especially Russian.
Okay, so and again, we're coming towards the end, and I actually have a few things that I need to do, but this is interesting, and it's actually reflected in the book. And I'll give you an example. Within the sacred liturgy, there is a prayer from the third hour, which was actually started in Constantinople. If you want to read more about that, it's the questions and answers of Ioannis Phountoules. Essentially, prior to the anaphora, there's a phenomenon that you see in liturgical practice called doubling, and you can see this, like, when you lock the door to your house, you like do it twice, just to
Yeah,
make sure that it's done. And within the Russian or the Slavonic rites, it was initially in the Greek rite, but then it moved to the Slavonic rites because the Slavs took our rites kind of in toto. And you saw the prayers from the third hour of "Take not thy Holy Spirit from me," etc., kind of repeated. You see this, for example, in the Roman rite in the second Confiteor. There was just kind of a liturgical doubling. So there's some like slight differences within the Greek tradition. For example, the and this again varies by parish, and that's why we have it in here. Some places they will sing the Beatitudes. I don't know if you've heard that sung in
correct.
a Greek parish. Other
No, I've
places
not.
don't. Yeah, other places don't, but some places do. I know a few parishes in Illinois, they just like singing the Beatitudes. Well,
That's
they're
more of an
in there.
OCA thing I've noticed.
It's an OCA, but it was actually in the 1920s that they kind of made the Beatitudes optional. They were kept in monasteries. So if you go to a Greek monastery, you'll hear the Beatitudes. If and the Psalms, for example, you don't hear the Psalms chanted in a lot of Greek Orthodox parishes. We made a note in each one of those antiphons, those one of three antiphons that are said in the liturgy, like, it might not be this hymn that you're hearing in these very on liturgical season.
I really appreciate that about the book, where there's
Yeah.
copious notes that, like, look, this could be different.
Yes. I mean, just like, for example, Vespers in Lent will be very different than Vespers during the liturgical year. But again, we
Absolutely.
had to hit on main themes rather than trying to make an enormous book um, that didn't hit those important themes that we wanted to get out of the book. So
There you go. All right. So in the video description, I have a link via Amazon to the book, The Divine Services of the Orthodox Church with commentary full color. I'm also putting a link in the video description to the Liturgy of the Hours in East and West for that guy who asked. And then you have repeatedly mentioned the questions and answers of Ioannis Phountoules. I'm putting a link to that. That one's not cheap. The 4 volumes, it looks like $200 from Holy Cross Bookstore.
and that's an aside. We are getting maybe $4. You know what I'm saying, per volume of this. And we're barely,
So it's a
because
labor of love.
it's a labor of love, and it is what it is. And so we are, doing our due diligence to
Well,
help out.
paper is expensive. Getting books bound is expensive. I mean, once you pay the editors, you pay, I mean, all that.
Yeah.
It's all expensive.
I didn't
It.
take any money for this, so I did it for free. But we all give we all have different gifts, and my really service was that being an editor and a steward of everything, and it was just a blessing working with, I would say, truly holy priests, who are completely sincere and doing everything that they can to build up the kingdom of God.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to see, let's see if we can get some of them on to do some talks about like the liturgical hours and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Dr. Emmanuel, do you ever go by Dr. Manny?
I do. The kids call me that.
Dr. Manny. Dr. Manly Manny. Okay. All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Guys, go buy this book. Even if you've grown up in the faith, get this book. It's really excellent. It explains everything to you. I can't say enough. I want to make it clear I don't get anything for promoting this book. I promote it simply because it's an excellent work that helps you guys out. And I see constantly people ask for good reading material, good catechism material. This is the stuff that you guys need. You don't need to be on Discord servers. You don't need to be watching live reaction videos to, reacting to whatever Protestant pastor. No, you need to be reading good material like this. Okay. So, all right. Wonderful. You take care now. See you, doctor.
All right. Take care. God bless you. All the best.
Bye-bye.